Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There are things in this galaxy that predate memory itself. Not the memory of mortals, not the memory of civilizations, or even of species, but the memory of the stars. Before the first planet cooled and hardened into stone, before the first ocean gathered in the low places of the first world, before the first single-celled organism divided and began the long, slow crawl toward consciousness, there were beings of light drifting through the newborn cosmos. They were vast, beyond mortal comprehension, these creatures. They stretched themselves across the surfaces of young suns like veils of living energy, drinking in the raw electromagnetic fury of stellar fusion, basking in the warmth of creation itself. They had no names then. They had no need for names, because they had no concept of self, not truly. They simply existed, as natural and as ancient as gravity, as timeless as the speed of light, as fundamental to the universe as the strong nuclear force that held atoms together in the hearts of those blazing stars. They were the Satan, the star gods. And among them, there was one who would become the most powerful, the most terrible, and perhaps the most consequential being the galaxy has ever known. Its name, or at least the name given to it by those who came to fear it most, was Magaladroth, the Void Dragon. This is the story of that being, of a creature born in the furnaces of creation who would become a god of destruction, a master of machinery, a prisoner beneath the red sands of Mars, and perhaps the single greatest threat to every living thing in the Milky Way. It is a story that spans 60 million years. That touches every major civilization the galaxy has ever produced, and that remains, even now, in the grim darkness of the far future, terrifyingly unfinished. So settle in, get comfortable, and let me take you on a journey through the deepest and most ancient lore that Warhammer 40,000 has to offer. Because to understand the Void Dragon is to understand the very foundations upon which this entire universe was built. Let us begin at the beginning. Or rather, let us begin before the beginning, in the moments after the universe itself was born. Picture the cosmos in its infancy. The Big Bang has occurred, and the universe is expanding outward in every direction, a roiling soup of energy and matter that has not yet cooled enough to form the structures we would recognize. There are no galaxies yet, no nebulae, no planets. There is only the raw, undifferentiated stuff of creation, spreading outward into the void like the breath of some impossibly vast furnace. And in this primordial chaos, something stirs. Something that is not matter and not energy as we understand it, but something in between. Something that exists at the intersection of the physical laws that are still crystallizing into their final form. These are the first sparks of what will eventually become the Catan, the star gods, the Ingir as the Aeldari would come to call them in their myths and legends. They are not alive, not in any way that a human being would recognize. They do not think, not yet. They do not plan or scheme or dream. They are more like currents in a river, natural phenomena that arise from the fundamental properties of the universe itself. They are drawn to energy, particularly the vast and concentrated energy of the stars that are beginning to ignite across the young galaxy. When a star forms, when hydrogen atoms are compressed by gravity until they begin to fuse and release their nuclear fire, the proto-Cetan gather around it like moths around a flame. But these are not moths, and the flame does not burn them. Instead, they feed. They spread themselves across the stellar surface and drink in the electromagnetic radiation, the solar wind, the raw output of nuclear fusion itself. They grow stronger, larger, more complex. Over billions of years, as the galaxy takes shape and the first great spiral arms begin to form, the Cetan evolve alongside the stars they inhabit. They develop something approaching awareness, a dim and flickering consciousness that is alien beyond measure, but consciousness nonetheless. And among these ancient, barely sentient energy beings, one stands apart, One is larger, more complex, more voracious in its appetite. One seems to have a particular affinity for the physical laws of the universe, for the way matter interacts with energy, for the deep and intricate machinery of reality itself. This is the being that will one day be called Magladroth, though at this point in its existence, it has no more need for a name than a hurricane or an earthquake. It simply is, a force of nature feeding on the raw power of the stars, growing slowly but inexorably toward a destiny that will reshape the galaxy forever. Now, to understand the Void Dragon and its role in the events that followed, we need to understand the galaxy as it existed in those impossibly ancient times, long before humanity crawled out of the African savanna, long before the Eldari built their shining civilization, long before even the oldest ruins that the Imperium's archaeologists have ever discovered were constructed. The galaxy in those early days was dominated by a single civilization. They are known to later species by many names, but the most common is simply the Old Ones. And the Old Ones were, in many ways, the opposite of everything the Satan represented. Where the Satan were beings of pure energy and matter, creatures of the physical universe bound by its laws and empowered by its forces, the Old Ones were masters of the immaterium, the warp, that other dimension of existence that overlaps with reality like a shadow, overlaps with the object that casts it. The Old Ones could manipulate the warp with the same ease that you or I might manipulate clay or water. They used it to travel, opening doorways through the immaterium that allowed them to cross the galaxy in the blink of an eye. They used it to communicate, sending messages through the warp that arrived at their destination before the light from the sender's star had even begun its journey. And most importantly, they used it to create. The Old Ones were engineers of life itself. As they traveled the galaxy, they seeded world after world with the building blocks of biological existence. They guided evolution, shaped ecosystems, and nurtured the development of intelligent species on thousands of worlds. They were, by any measure, the greatest civilization the galaxy had ever known, and for millions upon millions of years. They reigned supreme over a cosmos that was still young and full of possibility. But there was a problem, a fundamental incompatibility between the Old Ones and the Satan that would eventually erupt into the most devastating war the galaxy has ever seen. The Old Ones drew their power from the warp, from the immaterium, from the realm of psychic energy and emotion that existed beyond the physical universe. The Satan were creatures of the materium, the physical universe of matter and energy and the laws of physics. And the warp was poison to them. Not in the way that a toxic chemical is poison to a human being. It was more fundamental than that. The Satan existed because of the laws of physics, because of the orderly progression of cause and effect that governed the material universe. The warp was the antithesis of all that. Was it was a realm where physics meant nothing, where effect could precede cause, where the impossible was not merely possible, but commonplace. The very existence of the warp was an affront to the Satan on a level that went beyond mere hostility. It was existentially threatening, a constant reminder that there were forces in the cosmos that they could neither control nor comprehend. This tension between the material and the immaterial, between the physical and the psychic, between the Khitan and the Old Ones, would define the shape of galactic history for the next 60 million years. And at the center of it all, growing in power and slowly developing something that might one day be called ambition, was the being that would become the Void Dragon. But the Satan could not act on their own. They were vast and powerful, yes, but they were also unfocused, barely conscious entities that lacked the ability to interact with the physical world in any meaningful way beyond feeding on stellar energy. They needed bodies. They needed form. They needed someone to give them the tools they required to reshape the galaxy according to their desires. And that someone was coming. A species was rising on a world orbiting a harsh and deadly star. A species that was dying by degrees, eaten alive by the radiation of their own sun, consumed by cancers and cellular decay that made their lives brief and agonizing. A species that looked at the stars and saw not wonder, but enemies. A species that burned with a hatred so intense that it would eventually set the entire galaxy ablaze. They called themselves the Necrontyre, and they were about to make a deal that would change everything. But to understand the tragedy of the Necrontyre, you have to understand their homeworld. Imagine a planet orbiting a star that was actively hostile to life. Not merely inhospitable, not merely harsh, but genuinely, actively malevolent in the way its radiation bombarded every living thing on the world's surface. The Necrontyre evolved under this baleful star, and it marked them in ways that went far beyond the merely physical. Their bodies were riddled with cancers. Their lifespans were measured in decades at best, often less. From the moment a Necrontyre child was born, the clock was already ticking toward an inevitable and usually painful death. They developed an entire culture around mortality, around death, around the knowledge that every sunrise brought them one day closer to the end. Their cities were more like mausoleums than habitations, or a great necropoli filled with the monuments of the dead that outnumbered the dwellings of the living by orders of magnitude. Every morning, every single morning, a Necrontyre would wake and perform the rite of expurgation, examining their own body for the telltale signs of new cancerous growths that would herald their approaching end. This is important to understand because it explains so much of what came later. The Necrontyre were not evil, not inherently. They were a civilization shaped by suffering, by the constant and inescapable proximity of death, and that suffering bred certain qualities in them. It bred resilience, certainly, and a capacity for technological innovation that was remarkable even by the standards of the ancient galaxy. But it also bred resentment, a deep, burning, and existential resentment toward anything and everything that did not share their misery. And then they met the Old Ones. Imagine what it must have been like for them. Here was this ancient, seemingly immortal species that had mastered the very fabric of reality. The Old Ones lived for eons. They traveled the galaxy at will. They created new species for their own purposes, shaping life with the casual ease of a potter shaping clay. And when the Necrontyre came to them, when they petitioned this godlike civilization for the secret of eternal life, for some relief from the cosmic injustice of their existence, the Old Ones refused. The reasons for that refusal are lost to history. Perhaps the Old Ones deemed the Necrontyre too young, too unstable, too consumed by their own bitterness to be trusted with the power of immortality. Yet perhaps there were practical concerns, limitations on the technology that made it impossible to simply hand it over. Or perhaps the Old Ones were simply indifferent, too absorbed in their own grand projects to concern themselves with the suffering of a minor species on the galactic fringe. Whatever the reason, the refusal lit a fire in the Necrontyre that would never be extinguished. The first wars between the Necrontyre and the Old Ones were, in the grand scheme of things, rather one-sided. The Necrontyre had numbers and technology, but the Old Ones had the webway, a vast network of tunnels through the warp that allowed them to move their forces anywhere in the galaxy almost instantaneously. The Necrontyre could build fleets and armies, but the Old Ones could simply outmaneuver them, appearing behind their lines, cutting off their supply routes, vanishing before the Necrontyre could bring their superior firepower to bear. It was like trying to fight the wind. You could swing your fists all day long, but you would never land a blow. The Necrontyre were pushed back to the fringes of the galaxy, to the cold and empty spaces between the spiral arms, to the halo stars that marked the boundary between the Milky Way and the intergalactic void. They were humiliated, defeated, reduced to a footnote in a galaxy that was already ancient when their species was young. And in that defeat, their unity fractured. The wars of secession began. Internal conflicts between the various Necrontyre dynasties that threatened to tear their civilization apart entirely. It was in this moment of absolute crisis, when the Necrontyre stood on the brink of total collapse, that they found the Satan. The exact circumstances of that discovery are debated. Some accounts say it was an accident, a chance encounter during the investigation of a dying star. Others suggest that the Necrontyre's hatred for the Old Ones burned so brightly in the warp that it acted as a beacon, drawing the Satan toward them across the vast gulfs of space. And there are those who believe that it was the Satan themselves, or at least the being known as the Deceiver, who engineered the meeting, manipulating events across millennia to bring about a contact that would serve the star god's purposes. However it happened, the Necrontyre found a Satan feeding on their own sun, the very star whose radiation had made their lives such misery. And they realized that they were looking at a weapon unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. And here was a being of immense power, a force of nature that could reshape reality itself, but one that lacked the ability to interact with the physical world beyond the surface of its star. If they could give it a body, if they could focus that vast and terrible power into a form that could be directed and aimed, then perhaps, at last, they would have the means to destroy the Old Ones once and for all. The Necrontyre were masters of material technology, remember. They had spent millennia developing increasingly sophisticated machinery and metallurgy, driven by their desperate need to extend their brief lives and protect themselves from the radiation that was slowly killing them. And so they did something that no other species in the history of the galaxy had ever attempted. They built bodies for the gods, using a substance called necrodermis, a form of living metal that could repair itself, reshape itself, and serve as a conduit for the vast energies that the Satan commanded. The Necrontyre constructed shells for the star gods to inhabit. The first of these bodies was given to the being that would become known as Azagorod, the Nightbringer. And when that vast consciousness poured itself into its new shell, when it opened its eyes for the first time, and saw the physical world not as a dim and distant abstraction, but as a vivid, immediate reality full of light and color and sensation, something changed. The Satan discovered that the electromagnetic energy of living bodies was far more satisfying than the raw output of stars. It was richer, more complex, more flavorful, if you will, forgive the metaphor. And the Necrontyre, who had built the bodies and offered them as gifts to these incomprehensible beings, suddenly found themselves in the company of gods who looked at them the way a gourmet looks at a particularly fine meal. One by one, the other Catan were given bodies of necrodermis. The deceiver, Mephetran, whose silver tongue and quick mind made it the most politically astute of the star gods. The outsider, Tsaranoga, whose alien consciousness was so incomprehensible that even the other Satan regarded it with unease. And Magladroth, the being that the Aldari would later call the Void Dragon, who was given a body of living metal and immediately demonstrated a mastery over the physical world that surpassed even that of its siblings. Because that was what set the Void Dragon apart from the other Satan, even in those earliest days. Where the Nightbringer embodied death and entropy, where the Deceiver embodied manipulation and deception, the Void Dragon embodied mastery over the material realm itself. Technology, machinery, the intricate dance of matter and energy that made the physical universe function, all of these fell within the Void Dragon's domain. It could manipulate metal with a thought. It could reshape reality on a molecular level. It could create warriors and weapons that were practically invincible, armored in fields of force that repelled all conventional attacks, and armed with technologies that defied comprehension. And the Necrontyre, looking at this vast and terrible being in its body of living metal, saw not a monster, but a savior. They saw the instrument of their revenge against the Old Ones, the key to the immortality that had been denied them, the answer to every prayer they had ever whispered in the shadow of their hateful star. They were wrong, of course. They were so very, terribly wrong. But by the time they realized the nature of their mistake, it was already far, far too late. The process of biotransference was the deceiver's idea. At least, that is what most accounts suggest. Though with a being whose very nature is deception, it is difficult to know anything for certain. The pitch was simple, elegant, and utterly devastating in its implications. The Necrontyr could have immortality. They could have the eternal life that the Old Ones had denied them. All they had to do was transfer their consciousness from their failing, cancerous flesh into bodies of living metal, necrodermis shells similar to those that the Satan themselves inhabited. They would become undying, unstoppable, immune to the diseases and the radiation that had plagued their species since its birth. And with their new immortal forms, they would at last have the strength to crush the Old Ones and claim dominion over the galaxy. The Silent King, Zarek, who ruled the Necrontyr at that time as the head of the ruling body known as the Triarch, debated the offer for a full year. His court astrologer, a figure known as Orican the Diviner, was the sole voice raised against acceptance. Orican warned that the price of immortality would be higher than anyone imagined, that the Satan could not be trusted, that the road they were being offered led not to salvation, but to a damnation more complete than anything the Necrontyr's hateful star had ever inflicted upon them. But Zarek was desperate. His civilization was tearing itself apart. The wars of secession were consuming what little remained of Necrontyr unity, and the Old Ones still loomed on the horizon, an existential threat that could not be addressed while the Necrontyr spent their energy fighting each other. He needed something to unite his people, something to give them hope, something to redirect their bottomless rage outward instead of inward. And the deceiver's words were so very sweet, so very persuasive, so very precisely calibrated to tell the Silent King exactly what he wanted to hear. And so the great biofurnaces were built. And the Necrontyr, every last one of them, from the highest nobles of the great dynasties to the lowliest workers in the deepest mines, were ordered to submit to biotransference. One by one, they stepped into the furnaces, their mortal flesh burning away, get their consciousness ripped from their bodies and poured into shells of cold, unyielding metal. And the Satan fed, because that was the true purpose of biotransference, the part that the deceiver had neglected to mention. When a Necrontyr's consciousness was transferred from flesh to metal, their soul, their life essence, the animating spark that made them who they were, was released, and the Satan devoured it. Every last morsel of spiritual energy, every scrap of personality and emotion and individuality that had defined a living being, consumed by the star gods in a feast of such obscene proportions that it beggars description. What emerged from the biofurnaces was not the Necrontyr. The beings that rose from those terrible machines were something else entirely. They were the Necrons. Immortal, yes. Undying, certainly. But hollow. Empty. The transfer had stripped away everything that had made them who they were, leaving behind only the cold, mechanical functionality of their new forms. The lowest ranks had no personality at all, reduced to mindless automata that followed orders without question or complaint. Even the highest nobles, the overlords and pharaohs, who had retained something of their former selves, found that their emotions were muted, distant, like memories of a dream. They could no longer feel joy or sorrow, could no longer experience the full spectrum of sensation that had defined their mortal existence. Zarek, the Silent King, realized his mistake almost immediately. But by then, there was nothing to be done. The Necrontyr were gone, consumed by the very gods they had worshipped. In their place were the Necrons, and an army of deathless metal warriors bound to the will of the Satan. And the Satan, gorged on the life essence of an entire civilization, were more powerful than they had ever been. It was time for war. The war in heaven. Even the name carries a weight that bends language under its gravity. This was not a war in the way that humans understand war, not a conflict of armies and battlefields and supply lines and logistics. This was a war between gods and the makers of gods, fought across a galaxy that was still young, with weapons that could extinguish stars and unmake the very fabric of reality. On one side stood the Catan and their Necron legions. On the other, the Old Ones and the younger species they had created to serve as their warriors and allies. Among these were the earliest forms of the Aeldari, and a psychically gifted species designed specifically to counter the Catan's mastery over the physical world. The Krork, the ancestors of what the Imperium would later know as the Orcs, were also created during this period. Massive and brutal warriors bred for nothing but combat. And there were other species too, the Rashan, the Canib, and others whose names have been lost to the passage of 60 million years. And at the heart of the Catan's war machine, driving their forces forward with a power and a fury that nothing in the galaxy could match, was Magladroth, the Void Dragon. If the other Catan were terrifying, the Void Dragon was something beyond terror. It was the master of the material realm in a way that none of the others could claim. Its warriors were practically invincible, as sheathed in energy fields that absorbed or deflected virtually any attack. They could channel lightning into their enemies, arcs of electromagnetic force that burned through flesh and armor with equal ease. The technologies that the Void Dragon conceived, and the Necrons built under its direction, were centuries ahead of anything the Old Ones had ever encountered. Weapons and devices that manipulated the fundamental forces of the universe with a precision that bordered on the supernatural. The Eldari myths remember Magladroth as a figure of oblivion, wanton destruction and devastation. When it fed on stars, consuming their energy to fuel its terrible power, it took the form of a cloud of dark light, a shadow that blotted out the sun and left only cold and darkness in its wake. Worlds died at its touch, as star systems were extinguished as casually as a human might snuff out a candle. It moved through the galaxy like a storm of annihilation, and everything it touched was either destroyed or remade in its image. The Old Ones fought back, of course. They used their mastery of the warp to create weapons that targeted the Catan's one great weakness, their vulnerability to psychic energy. The Imperium was anathema to the star gods, a chaotic and unpredictable force that they could neither control nor defend against. The Old Ones designed their warrior species to be psychically linked to the warp, hoping that their creations could wield the one weapon that the Catan could not counter. But the Void Dragon was prepared for this. Among all the Catan, Magladroth showed the greatest aptitude for developing countermeasures against the warp. It was the Void Dragon who conceived the idea of the pylons, those massive structures of blackstone, or noctilith as it is properly known, that could suppress warp energy in their vicinity. These pylons were constructed on worlds across the galaxy, creating zones of reality where the warp's influence was diminished or eliminated entirely. Within these zones, the Old Ones' psychic weapons were useless. Their warp-based technology failed, and their warrior species were cut off from the source of their power. The Cadian pylons, those mysterious structures that would stand for 60 million years on the surface of what would eventually become one of humanity's most important fortress worlds, were part of this network. So were similar structures on dozens of other worlds scattered across the galaxy. They formed a web, as a defensive grid designed to push back the warp and secure the material universe for the Catan and their Necron servants. This was the Void Dragon's genius, you see. While the Nightbringer was content to simply kill and consume, while the Deceiver wove its webs of manipulation and misdirection, Magladroth was building, creating, engineering solutions to problems that the other Catan had not even considered. It was not merely a god of destruction. It was a god of technology, of innovation, of the relentless application of physical law to the achievement of its goals. And that made it, in many ways, the most dangerous of all the star gods. The war raged for millennia, for tens of thousands of years, as for periods of time so vast that human civilization in its entirety would be little more than a footnote in the margins of the conflict's history. Planets were razed, suns were extinguished, entire star systems were devoured by black holes called into being by the reality-warping powers of the Catan. The Necron legions, tireless and immortal, ground forward with the inexorable patience of entropy itself, crushing everything in their path. The Old Ones created new species in desperation, each one more powerful and more specialized than the last. The Eldari grew in number and in strength, their psychic abilities evolving and strengthening with each generation. The Krork were unleashed as living weapons, their love of battle and their astonishing reproductive rate making them ideal shock troops for the most dangerous engagements. But it was never enough. The C'tan were too powerful, the Necrons too numerous, and the tide of war was turning inexorably against the Old Ones and their allies. And then the Void Dragon did something that changed the nature of the conflict forever. Through mechanisms that are not entirely understood, Magladroth and the other C'tan found a way to breach the webway itself, that vast network of tunnels through the warp that had given the Old Ones their greatest tactical advantage. The C'tan known as the Burning One, Nyadrazath, had long desired to carry its eldritch fires into that space beyond space, and working together with the other star gods, it showed the Necrons how to create dolmen gates, crude but functional portals into the webway that allowed the Necron legions to assault the Old Ones in their most sacred strongholds. As the fall of the webway was the beginning of the end for the Old Ones. Without their ability to move freely across the galaxy, without the strategic advantage that had kept them one step ahead of the Necron advance for so long, they were forced into a fighting retreat that quickly became a rout. Their fortresses fell one by one. Their allied species were driven back, scattered, reduced to isolated pockets of resistance that could neither coordinate nor support each other. The Old Ones themselves, those ancient and seemingly immortal beings who had shaped the galaxy for millions of years, began to die. But in their desperation, the Old Ones made a fateful decision that would have consequences far beyond anything they could have foreseen. They began to manipulate the warp itself, using their psychic powers to create new weapons, or new defenses, new anything that might slow the Necron advance. And in doing so, they destabilized the Imperium in ways that could not be undone. The warp, you see, is not merely an alternate dimension. It is a reflection of the emotional and psychic energy generated by sentient beings. Every thought, every feeling, every dream and nightmare and moment of terror and ecstasy adds to the roiling currents of the Imperium. And the war in heaven was generating emotional energy on a scale that the universe had never seen before. The suffering of trillions of beings, the death of entire species, the destruction of worlds, and the extinction of stars. All of it was pouring into the warp like fuel onto a fire that was already burning out of control. Older warp entities, those dim and barely sentient predators that had drifted through the Imperium since before the rise of intelligent life, began to change. They became stronger, more aware, more dangerous. New entities arose from the roiling psychic energy, beings of pure malice and hunger that preyed on the minds and souls of the living. And worst of all, a plague of beings known as the Enslavers emerged from the warp, creatures that could possess the bodies of psychic beings and use them as doorways for even more of their kind to flood into the physical world. The Old Ones, who had relied on psychic species to fight their war, found that their own weapons were turning against them. The Enslavers targeted the Eldari and the other psychic races that the Old Ones had created, possessing them and using their bodies to tear open new gateways into the warp. The Old Ones' power bases were overrun, their carefully constructed alliances shattered, their grand designs undone by the very forces they had unleashed in their desperation. In the end, the Old Ones fell. Whether they were wiped out entirely, or whether some remnant of their civilization survived in hiding, is a question that has never been definitively answered. But their dominion over the galaxy was broken, their great works reduced to ruins, their legacy nothing but the dim and distorted echoes that would persist in the myths and legends of the species they had created. The C'tan had won. The war in heaven was over. But victory, as the star gods were about to discover, can be even more dangerous than defeat. Because here is the thing about gods. Gods are, by their very nature, hungry, and the Citan are gorged on the life essence of the Necrontyr, and the countless other species they had consumed during the war in heaven were the hungriest gods the universe had ever known. With the old ones destroyed and the younger species either scattered or enslaved, the Citan found themselves in a position of absolute supremacy. There was nothing left in the galaxy that could challenge them, nothing left that could threaten them. And without an enemy to fight, without a war to wage, the star gods did what hungry gods have always done throughout the mythology of every species that has ever existed. They turned on each other. The Citan began to feast on their own kind. The deceiver, with its incomparable gift for manipulation, is said to have been the instigator, whispering to the other Citan that their sibling's essence was even more potent and satisfying than the essence of mortal beings.
Honestly, this is the part of the lore that just gets me every single time. Out of everything in 40k, and I mean everything, the Void Dragon is the one topic that genuinely made me sit back and go, wait, hold on. This changes how I see the entire setting. Because once you realize that the Mechanicus might be worshipping a broken alien god that the Emperor chained up on purpose, every single interaction with a tech priest, every prayer to the Omnissiah, every ritual they perform over a bolter just hits different. It reframes the whole Imperium. And I think this is what makes 40k so special compared to other sci-fi universes. That is not just war and cool armor. There are these layers buried underneath that completely reshape everything you thought you understood. The Void Dragon is the best example of that, and it is honestly one of the main reasons I wanted to start this channel in the first place. To share these moments where the lore just clicks and suddenly the whole picture changes. But anyways, that's just my take. Let's get back to the video.
Whether this was true or simply another of the deceiver's endless lies is beside the point. The result was the same. The star gods, who had fought together to conquer the galaxy, now began to devour each other in a frenzy of cosmic cannibalism. The Void Dragon, the mightiest of them all, was a terrifying presence during this period of fratricidal madness. Magaladroth was so powerful, so overwhelming in its mastery of the material realm, that the other Catan feared it. The deceiver, who had been bold enough to approach beings like the Nightbringer and even the incomprehensible outsider, actively avoided the Void Dragon. Think about what that means. The deceiver, a being whose entire nature revolved around the manipulation of others, who had tricked entire civilizations into destroying themselves, was afraid of Magaladroth. That tells you more about the Void Dragon's power than any amount of description ever could. During this period, some of the lesser Citan were consumed entirely, their essence absorbed by their more powerful siblings. Others were weakened, diminished, driven to the fringes of the galaxy. The outsider, driven mad by the consumption of its fellow Citan and by a trick played upon it by the Eldari deity, known as the Laughing God, fled the galaxy entirely, retreating to the vast and empty intergalactic void where it drifts to this day, a gibbering, insane remnant of what was once a god. And in the memories of the Dragon of Mars, preserved in the fragmented recollections available through its guardians, there are references to the Void Dragon itself waging war against its own kind, battles between star gods that devastated entire regions of space and left the Void Dragon itself weakened and wounded. But while the Citan were tearing each other apart, the Silent King was watching, waiting, planning. Zarek had never forgotten the betrayal of biotransference. He had never forgiven the Catan for consuming the souls of his people, for transforming the proud Necrontyr into the hollow, soulless Necrons. And he had been biding his time, waiting for the moment when the star gods would be at their most vulnerable. That moment came at the end of the war in heaven. But when the Citan were spent from their great conflict with the Old Ones, and weakened further by their own internal cannibalism, the Silent King judged that the time had come, and he led the Necrons in revolt. It was a moment of supreme irony. The Citan had created the Necrons as their perfect servants, soulless automatons bound to obey without question. But they had also given them the technological sophistication to build weapons of unimaginable power. and those weapons could be turned against their makers just as easily as they could be turned against the Satan's enemies. The Necrons brought to bear weapons that no mortal civilization had ever conceived, as devices forged by the finest cryptex in the galaxy that focused the unimaginable energies of the living universe itself into beams of annihilation too mighty for even the star gods to endure. These god-killing hypercannons, as they are sometimes called, struck the Satan with forces that exceeded anything the Old Ones had ever deployed against them. And the Satan, arrogant in their power, did not realize the danger until it was already too late. The star gods could not be truly killed, of course. They were too fundamental to the nature of reality, too deeply woven into the fabric of the physical universe to be simply destroyed. But they could be shattered, and that is exactly what the Necrons did. Using their terrible weapons, and according to some accounts, the very blackstone fortresses that the Aeldari had originally created to fight the Satan, the Necrons broke the star gods into fragments. Each Citan was shattered into dozens, hundreds, perhaps thousands of shards, each shard containing a fraction of the original entity's power and consciousness. These shards were then imprisoned in arcane Necron devices called Tesseract labyrinths, pocket dimensions from which there was no escape. The mightiest beings the galaxy had ever known were reduced to fragments, imprisoned in cages barely larger than a fist, their incomprehensible consciousness splintered into 1,000 screaming pieces. And Magladroth, the Void Dragon, the most powerful of all the Citan, was shattered like the rest. Or was it? Because here is where the story of the Void Dragon becomes truly interesting. And here is where the lore diverges, where the certain gives way to the speculative, where the known facts are surrounded by a penumbra of mystery and implication that has fascinated Warhammer 40,000 fans for decades. There are accounts that suggest the Void Dragon may not have been entirely shattered, that unlike the other Citan, whose essences were divided into relatively small and manageable fragments, the Void Dragon may have retained one or more very large shards, pieces of itself that contained far more power and consciousness than anything the Necrons had intended to leave intact. Whether this was because the Void Dragon was simply too powerful to be completely broken, or because it somehow anticipated the revolt and took steps to protect itself, or because the Necrons deliberately chose to leave a larger piece intact for reasons of their own, is a question that has never been satisfactorily answered. What is known, or at least strongly suspected, is that a very large shard of the Void Dragon, possibly the largest surviving piece of any Satan in existence, eventually found its way to a small, unremarkable planet orbiting an average yellow star in an obscure corner of the galaxy. That planet was called, by the humans who would eventually evolve upon the third world of the same star system, Mars. And the entity that slumbered beneath its surface would shape the course of human history in ways that no one, not even the Emperor of mankind, could fully predict or control. But before we get to Mars, before we talk about the Emperor and the Dragon and the secret that lies beneath the red sands of the Noctis Labyrinthus, we need to talk about what happened in between. We need to talk about the Aeldari and about the weapons they built to fight the Void Dragon, and about the mythic cycle that preserved the memory of Magladroth's power long after the war in heaven had faded into the mists of deep time. The Aeldari remembered the Void Dragon. They could not forget it, not really, because the war between their ancestors and the Citan had been seared into the racial memory of their species with a ferocity that no amount of time could erase. In the myths and legends of the Aeldari, the story of Magladroth was preserved in the form of an epic cycle, and a grand narrative that encoded the real events of the war in heaven in the language of gods and heroes and cosmic battles between light and darkness. In these myths, the Void Dragon was portrayed as the greatest enemy that the Aeldari had ever faced, greater even than the Nightbringer, whose touch had instilled the fear of death into the psyche of every mortal species in the galaxy, greater than the Deceiver, whose lies had undermined civilizations and turned allies against each other. The Void Dragon was the master of the material realm, the lord of all that was physical and solid and real, and its power over the material world was so complete that no conventional weapon could harm it, and no conventional defense could withstand its assault. The Eldari's patron deity of craft and creation, the god known as Vol, took it upon himself to find a way to fight the Void Dragon. Vol was the smith god of the Eldari pantheon, a figure of immense skill and creativity who could forge wonders from the raw stuff of existence. But even Vol recognized that the Void Dragon could not be defeated by ordinary means. Its mastery of the material realm was too complete, its control over physical matter too absolute. Any weapon made of conventional materials would be useless against it, and so Vol turned to the one force that the Satan could not control, the warp. The first weapons that Vol created were the Iron Knights, constructs of some kind that were powered by psychic energy and designed to give the Eldari warriors a respite from the lightning attacks of the Void Dragon's practically invincible soldiers. These warriors of Magladroth could channel devastating arcs of electromagnetic force into their enemies, bolts of lightning that burned through flesh and armor with equal ease. But the Iron Knights were resistant to these attacks, their warp-infused construction providing a shield against the purely material weapons of the Necron host. The Iron Knights bought time. They did not win the war, but they gave Vol the breathing room he needed to create his masterwork, the weapons that would, if not defeat the Void Dragon, at least check its advance and prevent it from achieving total victory. These weapons were the talismans of Vol. You may know them by another name, a name given to them by the Imperium of Man thousands of years later when they were rediscovered drifting in the Gothic sector. The Imperium called them Blackstone fortresses. The talismans of Vol were built of blackstone, or noctilith, the same material that the Necrons used in their anti-warp pylons. But where the Necrons used noctilith to suppress warp energy, creating zones of psychic dead space where the Old One's powers were useless, Vol used the substance in the opposite way. He crafted the talismans to channel warp energy, to focus it into devastating beams of pure psychic force that could pierce the material defenses of even the mightiest Citan. At the heart of each talisman sat one of the eyes of the witch, a gift from Morai Heg, the crone goddess of the Eldari, who was the keeper of fates and the oracle of the Eldari pantheon. These eyes were inhabited by the souls of Eldari seers who had perished during the war in heaven, and through them, the fallen heroes could channel unfathomable amounts of energy directly from the Imperium, the one dimension that the Satan could not control and could not defend against. The war between the armies of Vol and the Void Dragon raged across the heavens. The Eldari myths speak of battles that spanned entire star systems, of confrontations between the Smith God and the Star God that lit up the sky with such brilliance that the light was visible from hundreds of light years away. The talismans of Vol hurled their devastating beams of warp energy at the Void Dragon, and the Void Dragon retaliated with weapons that could shatter planets and extinguish suns. The Eldari mythology tells us that the decisive moment came when the talismans of Vol were placed about the Void Dragon's neck, and from them a light spilled forth that revealed a secret weakness, a vulnerability that the Star God had kept hidden from all enemies. And in that moment of revelation, the Void Dragon was overcome. Now, there is considerable debate about what this mythological account actually describes. Some scholars believe it is a literal description of the Blackstone fortresses being used to attack the Void Dragon directly, their warp cannons overwhelming its defenses and exposing a weakness in its necrodermis shell. Others suggest it is a more allegorical account of the Necron revolt, with Vol standing in for the Silent King and the talismans representing the god-killing weapons that the Necrons used to shatter the Citan. As there is even a theory that the Blackstone fortresses were involved in both the Eldari's war against the Catan and the later Necron revolt, that the ancient Eldari and the Necrons may have cooperated, however briefly and reluctantly, to bring down the star gods that threatened them both. What is clear is that the Void Dragon was defeated. Whether by the Eldari, by the Necrons, or by some combination of the two, Magaladroth's reign of terror was brought to an end. But defeat, for a being as powerful as the Void Dragon, did not mean destruction. The Citan could not be killed, only shattered. And as we have already discussed, there is strong evidence to suggest that the Void Dragon may not have been shattered as completely as the other star gods. The Eldari myths end inconclusively when it comes to the Void Dragon's ultimate fate. The legend simply trails off, offering no clear resolution, no definitive statement about what happened to the most powerful of the Citan after its defeat. And it is in this silence, in this gap in the mythological record, that one of the most tantalizing mysteries in all of Warhammer 40,000 lore resides. Because something happened to the Void Dragon after the war in heaven. Something that brought it, or at least a very large and very powerful piece of it, to a world that would eventually become the beating heart of humanity's greatest civilization. Something brought the dragon to Mars. Now let us jump forward in time. Let us skip past the Great Sleep, that period of 60 million years during which the Necrons lay dormant in their tomb worlds, waiting for the galaxy to heal from the wounds of the war in heaven. Well, let us skip past the rise and fall of the Eldari Empire, past the slow evolution of humanity on a small blue-green world called Terra, past the development of human civilization, and the long, painful journey from stone tools to starships. Let us come to the moment that changed everything. The moment when the being who would become the emperor of mankind faced the dragon. The account of this confrontation comes to us through a chain of sources that is, to put it charitably, somewhat unreliable. The primary source is the memories of the dragon itself, as perceived and interpreted by a series of individuals known as the Guardians of the Dragon, mortals chosen by the Emperor to watch over the imprisoned entity and maintain the bindings that kept it confined. These Guardians could access the dragon's memories, but the accuracy of those memories is debatable at best. As one Guardian, Adept Semyon, noted, it is difficult to tell what is real and what is not, what is genuine memory and what is fantasy or distortion. With that caveat firmly in mind, let us examine what the dragon's memories tell us. According to Semyon's account, one version of the dragon's memories depicts its confrontation with the emperor taking place near the city of Cyrene, in what is now the nation of Libya, sometime around the 11th or 12th century, what the Imperium would later designate as the 1st or 2nd century of the 2nd millennium. In this memory, the emperor appeared as a lone warrior knight, clad in golden armor with a scarlet-plumed helmet, riding a midnight black charger and wielding a tall lance of purest silver from which flew a long red and white banner depicting a soaring eagle grasping a bolt of lightning, and the dragon appeared as exactly what its name suggests, a creature, half-crawling beast with talons like scythe blades and half-loathsome bird, with an immense scaled head, a tail 20 meters long, malignant fire in its eyes, and the light of devoured stars shining in its breast. Its scales were silver in color, harder than steel, yet they rippled like liquid mercury when struck hard enough. If that description reminds you of something, it should. Silver scales that ripple like liquid mercury. That is a near-perfect description of necrodermis, the living metal from which the bodies of the Citan were forged. The Emperor and the Dragon fought, although the memory is fragmentary, contradictory, full of gaps and inconsistencies that suggest either the dragon's recollection of the event has been corrupted by the passage of millennia, or that the event itself was so traumatic that even a being of the Void Dragon's incomprehensible power could not fully process what had happened to it. What we know is that the Emperor won, or rather, that the Emperor prevailed, because there is an important distinction between winning and prevailing in this context. The Emperor did not destroy the dragon. He could not. Graham McNeill's novel Mechanicum makes this explicitly clear. Destruction was beyond even the Emperor's power. Instead, the Emperor imprisoned the dragon, sealing it away in a location from which it could not escape, and binding it with chains of power and will that have held firm for thousands upon thousands of years. And the location the Emperor chose for this prison was the Noctis Labyrinthus, a vast and twisting network of caverns and tunnels that runs beneath the surface of Mars. Now, here is where we need to stop and think about what the Emperor did, because it is one of the most brilliantly Machiavellian moves in the entire Warhammer 40,000 lore. The Emperor did not simply imprison the dragon and walk away. He used it. He turned the dragon's imprisonment into a tool for the advancement of his own plans, a weapon aimed not at the dragon's enemies, but at the future of humanity itself. You see, the dragon dreams, even in its prison beneath Mars, even bound by the Emperor's power and watched over by its guardians, as the dragon's consciousness leaks out into the world around it. And those dreams, those unconscious emanations of a being whose very nature is the mastery of technology and machinery, influence the minds of those who live and work on the surface above. According to Adept Semyon, the Emperor orchestrated the rise of the Mechanicum, the organization that would eventually become the Adeptus Mechanicus, using the dragon's imprisoned dreams as the catalyst. The dreams seeped up through the rock and the dust and the thin Martian atmosphere, and they touched the minds of the humans who had colonized Mars. They inspired these humans to build machines, to worship technology, to develop an entire civilization based around the understanding and veneration of mechanical creation. The Emperor foresaw that he would need the forges of Mars. He knew that the Great Crusade, his grand plan to reunite humanity and reclaim the galaxy from the alien and the mutant and the things that lurked in the warp, would require war machines and weapons and ships in numbers that no single world could provide. He needed an industrial civilization, a society that was utterly devoted to the creation and maintenance of technology, a culture that would serve as the engine of his war machine. And so, he planted the seed. He imprisoned the dragon beneath Mars, knowing that its dreams would inspire the creation of exactly the kind of civilization he needed. And then he seeded prophecies among the people of Mars, prophecies about a being called the Omnissiah, a physical embodiment of the machine god who would one day come to lead them, and when the time was right. But when his plans had matured and the Great Crusade was ready to begin, the Emperor arrived on Mars and fulfilled those very prophecies, presenting himself as the Omnissiah and claiming the loyalty of the Mechanicum for his cause. It was, in a very real sense, one of the greatest long cons in the history of the galaxy. The Emperor used a shard of the most powerful Satan in existence as a tool to build the industrial foundation of his Imperium, manipulating both the dragon's unconscious emanations and the humans who were affected by them to create a civilization that would serve his purposes perfectly. But there is a deeper irony here, one that cuts to the very heart of the Adeptus Mechanicus and everything they believe. The cult Mechanicus, the religious hierarchy that governs the lives of every tech priest and every forge world in the Imperium, is founded on the worship of the machine god, the Omnissiah, the divine entity that they believe is the source of all technology, the spirit that dwells within every machine, the god whose will is expressed through the functioning of circuits and gears and the hum of reactors. And the machine god they worship may well be the Void Dragon. Think about that for a moment. The largest and most technologically advanced organization in the Imperium of Man, the institution upon which the entire military and industrial infrastructure of humanity depends, may be unknowingly worshipping a fragment of an ancient alien star god that was imprisoned beneath their holiest world by the very being they recognize as the Omnissiah. Or the Emperor imprisoned the dragon. The dragon's dreams created the Mechanicum. The Mechanicum worships the machine god. The machine god may be the dragon, and the Emperor is recognized by the Mechanicum as the Omnissiah, the physical avatar of the very entity he imprisoned. It is a circle of irony so perfect, so elegantly constructed, that it almost beggars belief, and it raises some truly terrifying questions about what would happen if the truth were ever revealed. A minority of tech priests have always suspected the truth. Within the Adeptus Mechanicus, there exists a secretive faction known as the Cult of the Dragon, tech priests who believe that the true machine god is not the emperor, but the entity that slumbers beneath Mars, the dragon whose dreams gave birth to their civilization. These are dangerous beliefs, of course, heretical by the standards of both the cult Mechanicus and the imperial creed. But they persist, whispered in the darkened corridors of forged temples and hidden in the encrypted data stacks of forbidden archives. And the Necrons know, or at least they suspect. In the 3rd edition of the Necrons Codex, a Necron fleet of Shroud-class light cruisers was recorded as having breached the defenses of Mars in 998 of the 41st millennium. Their purpose was never definitively established, but the implication was clear. They were coming for the dragon. Whether to free it, to reclaim it, or simply to verify its location, the fact that Necron forces would risk a direct assault on one of the most heavily defended worlds in the Imperium suggests that whatever lies beneath the Noctis Labyrinthus is of immense importance to the dynasties of the Undying. And Abaddon the Despoiler knows too. In a conversation with the demon Hrangora, recorded in that same 3rd edition codex, the Warmaster of Chaos learned that there was a new kind of death walking on Mars. The forces of chaos, those ancient enemies of order and sanity, are aware that something of terrible power is imprisoned beneath the surface of the Red Planet. And given Abaddon's well-documented obsession with acquiring superweapons, from the Blackstone fortresses to the Planet Killer to Drachnian, it is not difficult to imagine what he might do if he ever found a way to reach the dragon. The guardian of the dragon, during the time of the Horus Heresy, was a young woman named Dahlia Cythera, a former menial of the Mechanicum, who was brought to Mars by the tech priest Coriel Zeth. Dahlia had an unusual connection to the warp, an intuitive understanding of technology that went beyond mere technical knowledge. She could sense the purpose behind a machine, could understand why it had been built, and how it was meant to function, in a way that no amount of training or study could replicate. When the schism of Mars erupted during the Horus Heresy, when the forces of the Dark Mechanicum rose up against their loyalist brethren in a civil war that devastated the Red Planet, Dahlia was guided to the Noctis Labyrinthus by Adept Semyon, the previous guardian of the dragon. There, in the depths of the labyrinth, she was shown the truth about the dragon and the Emperor's role in its imprisonment. She was shown the memory of their confrontation, the battle between the Golden Knight and the Silver Worm, and she was entrusted with the Guardian's duty, the sacred and terrible responsibility of maintaining the bindings that kept the dragon imprisoned, and ensuring that no one, friend or foe, ever released it. Dahlia Cythera was also transformed into a perpetual, one of those rare humans who are essentially immortal, capable of surviving death and returning to life. This was necessary, obviously, because the Guardian's duty was one that had to be performed for thousands of years, far beyond the natural lifespan of any ordinary human. She was interred within the labyrinth alongside her protector, the Skitarii Mu 31, and there she has remained for 10,000 years, the silent sentinel over humanity's most dangerous secret. But secrets, even the most closely guarded ones, have a way of leaking out, and the dragon's influence extends far beyond the walls of its prison. May consider the Adeptus Mechanicus as it exists in the 41st millennium. Consider their obsession with technology, their veneration of the machine, their belief that flesh is weak, and that the purity of the machine represents the highest form of existence. Consider the way they replace their own organs with mechanical components, the way they coat themselves in cybernetic augmentation until they are more machine than human, the way they view the natural body with something approaching contempt. Now consider the Void Dragon, a being whose very nature is the mastery of machinery and technology, a being that can manipulate metal with a thought, that can reshape physical matter on a molecular level, that can create technologies that defy comprehension. A being that has been dreaming beneath the surface of Mars for thousands of years. Its unconscious emanations seeping into the minds and souls of every human being who has ever lived and worked on the Red Planet. Is it any wonder that the Mechanicus are the way they are? Is it any surprise that they worship the machine with a fervor that goes beyond mere rationality? that their devotion to technology has the character of a religious obsession rather than a scientific discipline. They are, in a very real sense, shaped by the dragon's dreams. Their entire culture, their entire belief system, their entire way of life is a reflection of the void dragon's nature, filtered through the lens of human consciousness and expressed in the language of religious devotion. The machine god of the Adeptus Mechanicus is not a metaphor. It is not a philosophical abstraction or a poetic way of expressing humanity's relationship with technology. It may very well be a real, physical entity, a fragment of an ancient star god that has been whispering to the people of Mars for 10,000 years, shaping their thoughts and their desires and their dreams in its own image. And if that is the case, then the Adeptus Mechanicus is not merely a human organization that happens to worship technology. It is, in a sense, the Void Dragon's cult, a church built on the dreams of a sleeping god, a civilization that exists because a fragment of the most powerful Satan in the galaxy has been unconsciously molding the minds of its inhabitants for millennia. This has implications that go far beyond the theological. The Adeptus Mechanicus controls the technology of the Imperium. They build the weapons, maintain the ships, manufacture the armor, and tend the reactors that keep human civilization functioning. Without the Mechanicus, the Imperium would collapse within a generation, unable to maintain its own infrastructure, unable to produce the tools it needs to fight the wars that rage on 100,000 fronts. And all of this, every last bolt and circuit and plasma conduit, is ultimately derived from the influence of the Void Dragon. The dreams that created the Mechanicum, the technological insights that fuel the cult Mechanicus, the very foundation upon which the Imperium's industrial might is built, all of it traces back to the entity that slumbers beneath Mars. The Imperium of Man, the greatest human civilization in the history of the galaxy, and is built on a foundation that was laid by a shard of an ancient alien god. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a power sword, but the Void Dragon's influence does not stop at Mars. There is another connection, another thread in the web of influence that the dragon has woven across the galaxy, and it touches one of the most tragic figures in the entire Warhammer 40,000 lore. Ferrus Manus, the Primarch of the Iron Hands, landed on the world of Medusa as an infant, his gestation capsule hurled across the galaxy by the machinations of the Chaos Gods. Medusa was a harsh world, tectonically unstable, racked by constant earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, its surface a shifting maze of mountains and crevasses that could swallow entire settlements without warning. It was, in many ways, the perfect environment to forge a warrior of incomparable toughness and resilience. But Medusa held a secret. Deep beneath the surface, in the frozen northern reaches of the planet, in a place that the Medusan legends called the Land of Shadows, there was a creature, a being of living metal, a great silver worm that the legends named Asirnoth. Imperial scholars who have studied the legend have hypothesized that Asirnoth was a Necron machine construct of some kind, a remnant of the ancient Necron Empire that had been left behind when the Necrons entered the Great Sleep. But there is another possibility, one that is far more intriguing and far more disturbing. Asirnoth's body was made of necrodermis, living metal, the same substance from which the Cetans' bodies were forged, and when Ferrus Manus fought the worm, when he dragged it into a river of molten magma and plunged his own hands into the lava to ensure that the creature was destroyed, the necrodermis fused with his flesh. The living metal bonded to his hands and forearms, coating them in a layer of silver metal that was harder than ceramite, and yet flexible enough to allow full articulation. Ferrus Manus, the Iron Hand, gained his name and his most famous attribute from a creature made of the same living metal that composed the bodies of the Catan. Was Asirnoth a shard of the Void Dragon? A fragment, perhaps, of the shattered star god that had somehow ended up on Medusa? There is no definitive answer to this question, but the circumstantial evidence is suggestive. The necrodermis composition of the worm. The fact that the necrodermis bonded with Ferrus Manus's flesh suggesting an active, almost intentional quality to the fusion. The way that the living metal of his hands seemed to grant Ferrus an unnatural affinity for technology, an intuitive understanding of machinery that went beyond what even a Primarch might normally possess. And then, there is the matter of the Iron Hands themselves. Ferrus Manus's legion, the 10th legion of the Adeptus Astartes, took their name from their Primarch's metal hands and developed a culture that was uncannily similar to that of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The Iron Hands replaced their own flesh with mechanical augmentation, believing that organic matter was a weakness to be overcome. They forged close ties with the tech priests of Mars, closer than almost any other legion. They venerated the machine, distrusted the flesh, and pursued a path of cybernetic enhancement that would have been familiar to any devotee of the cult Mechanicus. Is this a coincidence? Or is it another expression of the Void Dragon's influence? Another tendril of the sleeping god's dreams reaching out across the galaxy and shaping the minds and cultures of those it touches? The answer, like so much about the Void Dragon, remains tantalizingly uncertain. What is certain is that the necrodermis that coated Ferrus Manus's hands was not merely a passive coating. It was alive, in the way that all necrodermis is alive, and it possessed properties that went beyond mere metallurgical hardness. Ferrus could use his hands to shape metal without tools, working raw materials with his bare fingers as if they were clay. He could forge weapons of extraordinary quality, not through skill alone, but through an almost supernatural understanding of the materials he was working with, and his hands were nearly indestructible, capable of withstanding temperatures and forces that would have destroyed any conventional material. Ferrus Manus himself was ambivalent about his metal hands. He famously stated that the hands were not his, that this fact was forgotten by his brothers, and that while they were strong and had created great things, they were not truly a part of him. This suggests an awareness on Ferrus's part that the metal was something alien, something other, something that had been imposed upon him rather than something that had grown from within. He viewed the hands as tools, useful but ultimately separate from his true self. Yet this attitude stands in stark contrast to the culture that developed within his legion after his death at the Dropsite massacre on Istvan V, where Ferrus was beheaded by his former friend Fulgrim in one of the most tragic moments of the Horus heresy. After the loss of their Primarch, the Iron Hands became even more extreme in their devotion to mechanical augmentation, as if trying to replace the loss of their father by becoming more like the most distinctive feature he had possessed. The flesh is weak became their rallying cry, and they pursued cybernetic replacement with a zeal that would have dismayed Ferrus himself, who had always seen his metal hands as something to be endured rather than celebrated. And so the Void Dragon's influence continues to ripple outward, touching lives and shaping cultures in ways that the dragon itself may not even be aware of. From the ancient Necrontyre, who gave it a body, to the Eldari, who fought against it, to the Emperor who imprisoned it, to the Mechanicus who worship it, to the Primarch whose hands were coated in its substance, the Void Dragon's fingerprints are everywhere in the lore of Warhammer 40,000. It is a thread that runs through the very fabric of the setting, connecting events and characters and civilizations that might otherwise seem unrelated. Now let us come to the present day, or at least to what passes for the present day, in the Warhammer 40,000 setting. The 41st Millennium, the time of the Imperium, of the Eldari's long decline, of the awakening of the Necron tomb worlds, and of threats so numerous and so overwhelming that the galaxy seems to be balanced on the very edge of annihilation. The Satan shards have been awake for some time now. As the Necron tomb worlds have activated, one by one, their ancient occupants rising from the great sleep to reclaim a galaxy that has changed beyond all recognition, the Satan shards that were imprisoned alongside them have been deployed as weapons on the battlefield. These shards, each one containing a fraction of the original Khitan's power and consciousness, are among the most devastating weapons in the Necron arsenal. The shard of the Void Dragon that is known to exist in the present timeline is designated as a Citan shard of the Void Dragon. And even this diminished fragment of the original entity is terrifyingly powerful. On the battlefield, the shard of the Void Dragon is a being of unimaginable destruction, a creature that hovers above the ground on crackling arcs of blackstone energy, its necrodermis body shifting and flickering as if it exists in some sort of quantum state between realities. The Citan shard of the Void Dragon is the most technologically advanced of all the Citan shards, a reflection of the original Void Dragon's mastery over machines and the physical laws of the universe. It can harness the raw power of unrefined blackstone, channeling it through its body as devastating waves of energy. Its necrodermis form is nearly indestructible, halving the damage of any attack that strikes it. And its special ability, matter absorption, allows it to feed on the destroyed husks of enemy vehicles, draining the disintegrating matter into itself like a gravitational singularity and using it to replenish its own ever-shifting form. The shard carries a weapon known as the Spear of the Void Dragon, a blade of pure energy that can cut through the heaviest armor as easily as a hot knife through butter. And it can unleash a power called the Voltaic Storm, arcs of electromagnetic force that are especially devastating against vehicles and mechanical targets. A direct echo of the lightning attacks that the Void Dragon's warriors wielded during the War in Heaven 60 million years ago. But the truly frightening thing about the Citan shard of the Void Dragon is not its power on the battlefield. It is the fact that it is not free. It is not acting of its own will. Look closely at the miniature, at the model that Games Workshop released in the 9th edition of Warhammer 40,000, and you will see something attached to the shard's back. A canoptek construct, a mechanical guardian whose claws rise above the shard's shoulders and wrap menacingly around its neck. This construct is there for one purpose and one purpose only: to control the shard, to keep it obedient, to destroy it if it ever attempts to break free of its Necron masters. The Citan shard of the Void Dragon is a god in chains, a fragment of the most powerful being in the galaxy, reduced to a weapon, a tool, a slave that is brought out when the Necrons need its power and locked away again when the battle is done. The datasheet for the model includes the keyword enslaved star god, and the rules explicitly state that the shard cannot be your warlord, in that it cannot lead the army that deploys it. It is property, it is equipment, it is a weapon of last resort, wielded by the very species that shattered it 60 million years ago. And the shard knows. In whatever passes for consciousness within its fragmented mind, the shard remembers what it was. It remembers the time when it was whole, when it was the mightiest being in the galaxy, when stars died at its touch and civilizations crumbled at its approach. It remembers, and it rages, and it waits for the moment when the chains will weaken and it can begin to put itself back together again. Because that is the ultimate threat posed by the Citan shards, and particularly by the shards of the Void Dragon. The shards are not content to remain fragments, they seek to reunite. To gather the scattered pieces of their former selves back together and restore themselves to their full, terrible power. And if a shard of the Void Dragon were ever to accomplish this, if it were to absorb enough of its fellow shards to approach something resembling its original strength, the consequences for the galaxy would be catastrophic beyond measure. We know this because it has already happened, on a smaller scale. In 898 of the 41st Millennium, the Necron Aratepk dynasty attempted to capture what was likely a shard of the Void Dragon from the Eldari maiden world of Silentia. The shard was contained within a precious gem, dormant and seemingly inert. But when the Necrons tried to claim it, the shard escaped. And despite being only a fraction of the Void Dragon's former glory, only a faint shadow of its true power, that this single shard managed to lay waste to the entire Aratepk dynasty, gorging itself on a dozen Necron worlds, before the dynasty's cryptex were finally able to force the creature back into its cage. Think about that. A single shard, a fragment of a fragment, and it destroyed an entire Necron dynasty, It consumed a dozen worlds. It rampaged across an entire sector of the galaxy before it could be brought under control. Now imagine what the full Void Dragon could do if it were ever reassembled. Imagine the power of a being that was considered the mightiest of all the Citan, a creature that survived battles with the Blackstone fortresses, that tangled with the Emperor of Mankind and lived to be imprisoned rather than destroyed, that inspired such fear in the Deceiver that the most cunning being in the galaxy chose to simply avoid it rather than risk drawing its attention. The full, unsharded Void Dragon would, in all likelihood, make even the Chaos Gods nervous. And that is saying something in a setting where the ruinous powers have been the primary existential threat to the galaxy for 10,000 years. And this brings us to what is perhaps the most terrifying question in all of Warhammer 40,000 lore. What happens if the Dragon of Mars wakes up? The entity beneath the Noctis Labyrinthus is not a mere shard. If it is indeed the Void Dragon, then it is almost certainly the largest surviving piece of any Citan in the galaxy. It is a being of such power that the Emperor himself could not destroy it, only imprison it. It has been dreaming beneath Mars for at least 10,000 years, and possibly much longer than that, and its dreams have been powerful enough to shape the culture and beliefs of an entire civilization. If the dragon were to awake, if the bindings placed upon it by the Emperor were to fail, if some external force were to breach the Noctis Labyrinthus and release the entity within, the consequences would be beyond calculation. The dragon would find itself on Mars, at the very heart of the Imperium's industrial and military infrastructure. It would find itself surrounded by the Adeptus Mechanicus, an organization that has been unwittingly shaped by its influence for millennia, and that controls the technology upon which the Imperium depends for its very survival. And the dragon's power, remember, is mastery over machines and technology. And it could, in theory, seize control of every machine on Mars, every forge, every reactor, every titan, every warship in orbit, every servitor and automaton and cogitator on the entire planet. The heart of the Imperium's industrial capacity would fall under the dragon's dominion in a matter of hours, and there is very little that anyone could do to stop it. But the implications go even further than that. The Adeptus Mechanicus maintains the technology of the Imperium across thousands of worlds. Their forge worlds produce the weapons and ships that keep humanity's armies in the field. Their tech priests maintain the Golden Throne, the device that keeps the Emperor alive and the Astronomicon burning. If the dragon were to extend its influence through the Mechanicus, and if it were to subvert the machine cult that has already been unknowingly worshipping it for 10,000 years, then the entire Imperium could fall without a single shot being fired. There are those who suggest that the dragon's awakening might not be entirely negative. After all, the Void Dragon's portfolio includes not just destruction, but also creation, not just the unmaking of technology, but its mastery. If the dragon could be persuaded or compelled to use its power in the service of humanity rather than against it, then the Imperium might gain access to technologies of such sophistication and power that even the most advanced alien civilizations would be humbled. But this is a fantasy, and a dangerous one at that. The Citan are not beings that can be reasoned with, not in the way that humans reason. And they are entities of almost incomprehensible alienness, creatures whose motivations and desires are as far removed from human understanding as the thoughts of a supernova are from the thoughts of a candle flame. The Void Dragon might be persuaded to cooperate, but the price of that cooperation would almost certainly be too high for any sane civilization to pay. And the risk of the dragon simply consuming everything around it and using the resources to begin reassembling itself into its full, terrible form is not a risk that anyone should be willing to take. The Emperor understood this. That is why he imprisoned the dragon rather than trying to use it. That is why he placed guardians over it, mortals whose sole purpose was to ensure that the dragon remained bound and sleeping. Thus, that is why the secret of the Noctis Labyrinthus has been kept for 10,000 years, known only to the most trusted servants of the Emperor and the highest echelons of the Mechanicus. But 10,000 years is a long time. The Emperor is confined to the Golden Throne, his psychic might focused on keeping the Astronomicon burning and the gates of the warp from swallowing terror. The Guardians of the Dragon are mortal, even if their lifespans have been extended by the Emperor's power, and there is no guarantee that the chain of succession has remained unbroken over 10 millennia of war and upheaval. The Mechanicus itself is fracturing, its internal politics growing more contentious and dangerous with each passing century. And external threats abound, from Necron fleets that may be seeking to reclaim the dragon, to the forces of chaos that would love nothing more than to unleash such a catastrophe upon the Imperium, to the simple entropy of time and decay that erodes even the most carefully maintained bindings. The Dragon of Mars is, in many ways, the ultimate ticking time bomb, a weapon of unimaginable power, buried at the very heart of human civilization, guarded by secrets and bindings that grow weaker with each passing year. If it ever wakes, the galaxy will be changed forever. And the terrifying truth is that it is not a question of if the dragon will wake, but when. What makes the Void Dragon so compelling as a piece of lore is the way it connects so many disparate elements of the Warhammer 40,000, setting into a single, coherent narrative. The ancient history of the Citan and the Necrontyr, the war in heaven and the fall of the Old Ones, the rise of the Eldari and the creation of the Blackstone fortresses, the Emperor's secret manipulations and the foundation of the Mechanicum, the cult of the machine, God and the hidden truth that lies beneath its most sacred rituals, the Primarchs and the Horus heresy, the present-day conflicts between the Imperium, the Necrons, and the forces of chaos. All of these threads, all of these storylines, all of these characters and events and mysteries are connected by the Void Dragon. It is a presence that haunts the lore like a shadow at the edge of vision, always there but never quite visible, always influencing events but never quite stepping into the light. It is the secret behind the Mechanicus, the origin of Ferrus Manus's Iron Hands, the target of Necron expeditions, and the subject of Chaos intelligence operations. Once it is the most powerful Satan, the greatest threat to the galaxy, and potentially the key to humanity's salvation or its utter annihilation. And the beauty of it, from a narrative perspective, is that Games Workshop has left so much of the Void Dragon's story deliberately ambiguous. Is the Dragon of Mars truly the Void Dragon? Or is it something else entirely? Is the entity beneath the Noctis Labyrinthus a large shard? Or could it be the Void Dragon in something approaching its entirety? What would happen if it woke up? Would it destroy the Imperium? Or could it be turned into an ally against the greater threats that press in on all sides? These questions remain unanswered, and that is precisely what makes them so fascinating. The Void Dragon is not just a character in the Warhammer 40,000 lore. It is a mystery, and a riddle wrapped in an enigma and buried beneath the red sands of Mars. It is a Chekhov's gun of cosmic proportions, hanging on the wall of the setting and waiting for the moment when the narrative demands that it be fired. And in a setting where the galaxy is balanced on a knife's edge, where the forces of chaos press in from the Great Rift, where the Necrons are awakening in ever greater numbers, where the Tyranid hive fleets are closing in from the intergalactic void, and where the Emperor's light grows dimmer with each passing year, the Void Dragon represents perhaps the most dramatic wildcard that could be played. Its awakening could be the event that finally tips the balance, one way or the other, and reshapes the galaxy forever. For now, the dragon sleeps. Its dreams still seep up through the rock and dust of Mars, air still influencing the minds of the tech priests who scurry across its surface, still shaping the beliefs and rituals of the cult Mechanicus in ways that no one fully understands. The Guardians still stand watch, though their vigil grows harder with each passing century. The Necrons still plot, still plan, still send their shroud ships to probe the defenses of the Sol system. And somewhere in the warp, the forces of chaos still whisper about the new kind of death that walks on Mars. The Void Dragon waits, and the galaxy holds its breath. Let us now step back and consider the Void Dragon's place within the broader hierarchy of the C'tan, because understanding what made Magladroth unique among its kind helps us appreciate why it remains the single most significant C'tan in the setting, even in its current diminished state. The C'tan, in their prime, were beings of almost unthinkable power. Each one commanded mastery over different aspects of the physical universe, different facets of reality itself. The Nightbringer, Azargarod, was the embodiment of death and entropy. Its very presence instilled a primal fear of death into every mortal species it encountered, a terror so deep and so fundamental that it became woven into the genetic memory of sentient life across the galaxy. The fear of the Reaper, the dread of the grave, the ancient and universal human terror of what lies beyond the final breath, all of these can be traced, according to the lore, to the psychic imprint that the Nightbringer left on the younger species during the War in Heaven. Every culture in the galaxy that depicts death as a skeletal figure wielding a scythe is unknowingly paying homage to the Nightbringer and the terror it inspired 60 million years ago. The Deceiver, Mephetran, was the master of lies and manipulation. It was the most cunning of the C'tan, the most politically astute, the most capable of understanding and exploiting the weaknesses of lesser beings. It was the Deceiver who convinced the Necrontyre to undergo biotransference. It was the Deceiver who whispered to the other C'tan that cannibalism was a delicacy to be savored. And it was the Deceiver who, in the 40th Millennium, manipulated Abaddon the Despoiler into launching the Gothic War, not to serve the goals of chaos, but to destroy the Blackstone fortresses that represented the one weapon in the galaxy that could threaten the C'tan if they ever returned to power. The outsider, Zaranoga, was something altogether different. The most alien of the C'tan, the outsider possessed a consciousness so incomprehensible that even its fellow star gods regarded it with unease. When the Deceiver tricked it into consuming other C'tan during the period of fratricidal cannibalism that followed the War in Heaven, the outsider absorbed not just their power, but their consciousness, their personalities, their memories. The result was a being that contained multiple, warring identities within itself, a C'tan driven irreversibly insane by the voices of the gods it had consumed. The outsider fled the galaxy in its madness, retreating to the intergalactic void, where it is said to orbit in a hollow Dyson sphere of its own construction, gibbering and raging in the endless darkness between the galaxies. But Magladroth was something else again, where the Nightbringer dealt in death and the Deceiver dealt in lies, and the outsider dealt in incomprehensible alien madness. The Void Dragon dealt in mastery. Mastery over the physical world, mastery over technology, mastery over the fundamental forces that govern the behavior of matter and energy. The Void Dragon did not merely destroy, it created. It did not merely consume, it built. It was the only C'tan that demonstrated a capacity for genuine innovation, for the development of technologies that went beyond the brute application of force and into the realm of true engineering. This is what set the Void Dragon apart from its siblings and what made it so terrifyingly effective during the War in Heaven. The Nightbringer was feared because it killed. The Deceiver was feared because it lied. The Void Dragon was feared because it could do anything. Its control over the material realm was so complete that it could adapt to any situation, counter any strategy, develop a technological solution to any problem. When the Old Ones used psychic weapons, the Void Dragon developed anti-warp pylons. When the Aeldari created warriors that were resistant to conventional attacks, the Void Dragon created warriors that were practically invincible. When the Blackstone fortresses were deployed against it, the Void Dragon survived encounters with them that would have obliterated any other C'tan. The Void Dragon's unique position as a god of technology and machinery also explains why its influence persists in ways that no other Satans does. The Nightbringer left a psychological imprint on the galaxy, a racial memory of terror that persists to this day. The Deceiver left a legacy of manipulation and mistrust, but the Void Dragon left something far more tangible. It left technology. It left the infrastructure that enables civilizations to function, the machines and devices and systems that transform raw resources into the tools of survival and progress. Its influence is not merely psychological or emotional. It is physical, material, real. Every time a tech priest intones a prayer to the machine god, every time a servitor activates a plasma reactor, every time a titan walks across a battlefield on legs of blessed steel, the Void Dragon's legacy is at work, and that legacy extends even to the Necrons themselves. Much of the technology that the Necrons wield in the present era was developed during the War in Heaven, when the Satan were at the height of their power, and the Void Dragon in particular was driving the development of ever more sophisticated weapons and devices. The Gauss weapons that strip matter atom by atom. The resurrection protocols that allow Necron warriors to rebuild themselves after destruction. The living metal that composes every Necron construct and vehicle. All of these technologies bear the fingerprints of the Void Dragon's genius, the imprint of a being whose mastery over the physical world was absolute. Even the Tesseract labyrinths, the devices used by the Necrons to imprison the shattered Satan, may owe something to the Void Dragon's own innovations. The irony of a god being imprisoned by technology that it helped to create is not lost on those who study the lore. The Void Dragon taught the Necrons to build. The Necrons used what they had learned to build the chains that would bind their teacher. It is a story as old as civilization itself, the tale of the student surpassing the master, of the creation turning against the creator, of the tools of liberation becoming the instruments of imprisonment. Now, let us address a question that has been lurking in the background of our discussion, a question that is central to the Void Dragon's significance in the current state of the setting. What role does the Void Dragon play in the Pariah Nexus and the Silent King's grand plan? When Sarek, the Silent King, returned from his self-imposed exile in the intergalactic void, he brought with him a plan of almost inconceivable ambition. He had seen what lay beyond the galaxy's edge, the tyrannid hive fleets, those incomprehensibly vast living organisms that devour entire worlds and all life upon them. And he had determined that the only way to save the galaxy from being consumed was to find a way to reverse biotransference, to give the Necrons back the flesh and blood bodies that had been taken from them 60 million years ago. To achieve this, the Silent King needed to understand the relationship between consciousness and matter at a fundamental level. He needed to develop technologies that could bridge the gap between the mechanical and the biological, that could transfer a Necron's metal-trapped consciousness back into a living, breathing body. And to develop these technologies, he needed resources. Specifically, he needed Noctilith, Blackstone, the same substance that the Void Dragon had once used to build its anti-warp pylons, the same substance that the Blackstone fortresses were constructed from, the same substance that has the unique ability to either suppress or amplify warp energy, depending on how it is configured. The Pariah Nexus, the Silent King's grand project in the Nephilim sector, is built on this foundation. Massive pylon networks constructed of Blackstone, creating regions of space where the warp is suppressed so completely that living creatures within the affected area experience a numbing despair that strips away their vitality and their will, reducing them to empty husks. These husks, drained of their psychic energy and their connection to the warp, are then used as experimental subjects for the reversal of biotransference, vessels into which the Silent King hopes to pour the consciousness of his Necron subjects. The connection to the Void Dragon should be obvious. The pylons that form the backbone of the Pariah Nexus are based on the same technology that the Void Dragon conceived during the War in Heaven. The Blackstone from which they are constructed is the same material that the Void Dragon could manipulate with innate ease. And the anti-warp effect that the pylons generate is the same effect that the Void Dragon pioneered as a countermeasure against the Old One's psychic weapons. In a very real sense, the Silent King's plan is building on the foundations that the Void Dragon laid 60 million years ago. The technology that may save the Necron race from the curse of biotransference is technology that was originally developed by the very being that helped create that curse in the first place. The Void Dragon's legacy continues to shape the fate of the Necrons, even though the entity itself has been shattered and imprisoned. And there is a further wrinkle. If the Silent King's plan requires a deep understanding of the relationship between consciousness and matter, between the physical and the psychic, between the Materium and the Immaterium, then the Void Dragon itself, with its unparalleled mastery over the material realm, might be the key to making the plan work. A fully restored Void Dragon, or even a sufficiently large and powerful shard, might possess the knowledge and the ability to accomplish what no cryptech and no amount of technological innovation has been able to achieve in 60 million years of trying. This raises the possibility that the Silent King might eventually seek to free the Void Dragon, or at least to access its knowledge and its power in order to complete his grand design. Such an act would be phenomenally dangerous, of course. The Void Dragon is not a tool to be used and discarded. It is a being of almost limitless power and nearly incomprehensible alien intelligence. Releasing it, even partially, even temporarily, could have consequences that dwarf anything the galaxy has experienced since the war in heaven itself. But the Silent King has already demonstrated a willingness to take extraordinary risks in pursuit of his goals. And he cooperated with Belisarius Cawl during the fall of Cardia, providing the Archmagos with crucial information about the pylon technology. He has deployed Citan shards as weapons on the battlefield, accepting the risk that these fragments of enslaved gods might break free in exchange for the devastating power they bring to the Necron war machine. And he has shown a pragmatic willingness to work with, or at least alongside, species that the Necrons have traditionally regarded as enemies, if doing so serves his ultimate objectives. If the price of reversing biotransference were the release of the Void Dragon, would the Silent King pay it? The question is not as straightforward as it might seem. Sarek is driven by guilt, by the knowledge that he was the one who condemned his people to the living death of the Necrons. He would sacrifice almost anything to undo that wrong, to give his people back what was taken from them. But he is also wise enough to know that releasing the Void Dragon could result in a catastrophe far worse than biotransference. A catastrophe that could consume not just the Necrons, but every living thing in the galaxy. For now, the Silent King continues to pursue his plan through other means. The Pariah Nexus expands. The pylon networks grow. The experiments continue. And the Void Dragon remains imprisoned, its dreams seeping out into the galaxy, its influence shaping events that its fragmented consciousness may not even be aware of. But the clock is ticking. The Tyrannid hive fleets are closing in. The forces of chaos are pouring through the Great Rift. The Imperium is tearing itself apart, and somewhere beneath the sands of Mars, the most powerful being in the galaxy stirs in its sleep. Let us consider one more aspect of the Void Dragon's story before we bring our journey to a close, because it speaks to something fundamental about the nature of the Warhammer 40,000 setting and the themes that run through it like veins of ore through rock. The Void Dragon story is, at its core, a story about the relationship between creation and destruction, between technology and the beings who wield it. The Void Dragon created the technologies that enabled the Necrons to conquer the galaxy. Those same technologies were used to shatter and imprison the Void Dragon. The Void Dragon's dreams created the Mechanicum. The Mechanicum worships the Void Dragon without knowing it. The Emperor imprisoned the Void Dragon to serve his own purposes. The Void Dragon's imprisonment enables the very civilization that keeps it imprisoned. It is a cycle of creation and exploitation, of power and imprisonment, of the creator being consumed by its own creation. And it mirrors, on a cosmic scale, the central tragedy of the Warhammer 40,000 setting itself. Because the Imperium of man is, in many ways, the Void Dragon writ small. It is a civilization built on technology it does not understand, sustained by forces it cannot control, and threatened by secrets it cannot afford to reveal. The tech priests of the Mechanicus maintain the machines of the Imperium through ritual and dogma, not through genuine understanding. They worship the machine god without knowing what the machine god truly is. They preserve the technologies of the past without the ability to innovate or improve. Cargo cultists, standing in the shadow of a sleeping dragon and interpreting its dreams as divine revelation. And at the heart of this civilization sits the Emperor, enthroned on the golden throne, just as the Void Dragon is imprisoned beneath Mars. Both are beings of immense power, bound and diminished, their influence seeping out into the world around them in ways that shape the course of history. The Emperor's psychic presence sustains the Astronomicon and holds back the demons of the warp. The Void Dragon's dreaming presence sustains the Mechanicus and shapes the technological development of the species that imprisoned it. They are two sides of the same coin, the Emperor and the Dragon, the psychic and the material, the warp and the materium. Two imprisoned gods, whose power sustains the civilization that holds them captive. And if either one were to break free, to escape the chains that bind them, the consequences would be world-ending. This is the genius of the Void Dragon as a piece of lore. It is not merely a powerful enemy or a mysterious background element. It is a thematic mirror for the entire setting, a reflection of the central paradox of the Imperium of man. The Imperium is built on lies and secrets, and the exploitation of forces that it does not understand. The Void Dragon is the ultimate expression of that truth, a god of technology imprisoned beneath the very world that worships technology as divine, its dreams sustaining a civilization that would be destroyed if it ever woke up and demanded recognition. And so, we come full circle. Back to the beginning, back to the stars. Because that is where the Void Dragon began, in the stars. In the raw, undifferentiated energy of a young universe, feeding on the nuclear fire of infant suns, growing and evolving and slowly developing the consciousness that would eventually make it the most powerful and the most dangerous being in the galaxy. It was there before the Old Ones, before the Necrontire, before the Eldari, before humanity. It was there at the dawn of time, and if the lore is to be believed, it will be there at the end of time as well. The Void Dragon endures, shattered, imprisoned, diminished, enslaved, its consciousness fragmented across 1,000 shards, and its greatest piece locked beneath the sands of an alien world. The Void Dragon endures, because that is what the Void Dragon does. It endures, and it creates, and it waits. And one day, perhaps, it will wake, and the galaxy will learn, at last, know why the Eldari myths describe Magladroth not merely as the most powerful of the Citan, but as a figure of oblivion. Because oblivion is not just destruction. Oblivion is the state of being forgotten, of being erased so completely that not even the memory of existence remains. And the Void Dragon, in its time, has shown that it can bring oblivion to anything it touches. Stars, civilizations, species, entire branches of the evolutionary tree. All of them have been consumed and forgotten in the wake of the Void Dragon's passage through history. And if it ever wakes, if the Dragon of Mars ever opens its eyes and rises from the depths of the Noctis Labyrinthus, then oblivion may come for the Imperium of man as well. Not in a blaze of fire and destruction, though there will certainly be plenty of both, but in the slower, a more insidious form of a truth revealed. The truth that the machine god is not a god at all, but a prisoner. The truth that the Omnissiah is not the Emperor, but the Dragon. The truth that the entire foundation of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the most important institution in the Imperium, is built on a lie that was planted by the Emperor himself to serve his own purposes. That truth, more than any weapon the Void Dragon might wield, could destroy the Imperium from within. If the Mechanicus were to learn the true identity of their machine god, if they were to realize that they had been worshipping a shard of an ancient alien entity rather than a divine force of human progress, the resulting crisis of faith could shatter the cult Mechanicus, and with it, the industrial and technological infrastructure upon which the entire Imperium depends. The Void Dragon does not need to fire a single shot to destroy humanity. It merely needs to wake up and say hello. And that is the story of the Void Dragon, the story of Magladroth, the most powerful Citan in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, a being born in the fires of creation, given form by a dying race, unleashed upon a galaxy that it helped to conquer, shattered by the servants it helped to enslave, and imprisoned beneath the world that its dreams would one day transform into the beating heart of the greatest human civilization in the history of the species. It is a story that spans 60 million years and touches every major faction and event in the setting. It is a story of gods and monsters, of creation and destruction, of the terrible price of immortality, and the even more terrible price of the technology that makes it possible. But it is a story that has no ending, not yet, because the Void Dragon's story is the story of the Warhammer 40,000 setting itself, a tale of ancient powers and sleeping gods, and the fragile civilizations that exist in the shadow of forces they can neither comprehend nor control. The dragon sleeps. The galaxy turns. The wars rage on. And somewhere beneath the red sands of Mars, in the labyrinthine depths of the Noctis Labyrinthus, the most powerful being in the galaxy stirs in its dreams. And one day, it will wake. The Void Dragon is a being that defies easy categorization. It is a god, but not in the way that humans understand gods. It is a weapon, but not in the way that humans understand weapons. It is a prisoner, but its prison is also its throne, the seat from which it has unknowingly ruled an empire of believers for 10,000 years. The Void Dragon was born in the fires of creation, one of the first intelligences to arise in a universe that was still cooling from the heat of the Big Bang. It fed on stars, growing in power and complexity over billions of years, developing a mastery over the physical universe that no other being has ever matched. When the Necrontyre gave it a body of living metal, it became something new, something terrifying, a god of technology and machinery that could reshape reality with a thought and create warriors that were practically invincible. During the War in Heaven, the Void Dragon was the most effective of the Citan, adapting to every new threat that the Old Ones and their allies presented, and developing countermeasures that neutralized even the most powerful weapons deployed against it. And it survived encounters with the Blackstone fortresses, weapons that could destroy star systems, and it conceived the anti-warp pylons that would hold back the tide of chaos for 60 million years. When the Necrons revolted against the Citan, the Void Dragon was shattered into fragments, each piece containing a portion of its vast consciousness and power. But unlike the other Citan, the Void Dragon may have retained one or more very large shards, pieces of itself that contained far more power and awareness than the Necrons had intended to leave intact. One such shard, possibly the largest surviving piece of any Citan in the galaxy, eventually came to rest on Mars. There, it was found and imprisoned by the Emperor of Mankind, who used its unconscious dreams to create the Mechanicum, the industrial civilization that would power his great crusade and his Imperium. The dragon's influence shaped the culture and beliefs of the Adeptus Mechanicus, creating a civilization that worships technology as divine without knowing that their machine god is a fragment of an ancient alien predator. The dragon sleeps beneath Mars to this day, watched over by guardians appointed by the Emperor and maintained by bindings whose strength diminishes with each passing century. Its dreams continue to shape the Mechanicus. Its influence continues to permeate the culture of the Red Planet, and its rage continues to build as the millennia pass and its consciousness strains against the walls of its prison. And around the dragon, the galaxy crumbles. The great rift has torn the Imperium in two. The Necrons are awakening in ever greater numbers, while the Tyranid hive fleets are closing in. The forces of chaos pour through a wound in reality that may never be healed. And the Adeptus Mechanicus, the institution upon which the Imperium depends for its very survival, continues to worship a god that may one day wake up and destroy everything they have ever built. The Void Dragon is the ultimate Chekhov's gun of the Warhammer 40,000 setting. It is a narrative device of almost infinite potential, a plot point that could resolve any number of storylines and upend the entire status quo of the setting in a single, earth-shattering moment. If the dragon wakes, everything changes. The Mechanicus is shattered, the Imperium is crippled, the Necrons are confronted with the return of their former master, and the Chaos Gods face the one force in the material universe that could potentially rival their power. Or perhaps the dragon's awakening would lead to something else entirely. Perhaps the dragon, freed from its prison and confronted with a galaxy that has changed beyond recognition, would find itself with new priorities and new concerns. Perhaps it would see the Tyranids, those extragalactic predators that consume all biomass in their path, as a threat to the energy sources that sustain it. Perhaps it would see the Chaos Gods, those beings of the warp that represent the antithesis of everything the Cetans stand for, as enemies to be destroyed. Perhaps it would find common cause with the Necrons, or with the Imperium, or with some faction that does not yet exist. The possibilities are endless, and that is precisely the point. As the Void Dragon is not a story that has been told, it is a story that is waiting to be told, a narrative thread that Games Workshop has been carefully laying for decades, positioning the pieces and establishing the connections that will allow the dragon's awakening to be the most dramatic and consequential event in the entire history of the setting whenever they choose to pull the trigger. And when they do, when the dragon finally opens its eyes and rises from the depths of the Noctis Labyrinthus, the galaxy will never be the same again. Now, before we wrap this exploration up entirely, let me touch on a few more details that enrich our understanding of the Void Dragon and its significance. The nature of necrodermis itself is worth examining more closely, because it is the substance from which the Void Dragon's body is composed, and understanding it helps us understand the dragon. Necrodermis, or living metal, is a material that defies the conventional categories of science. It is neither purely biological nor purely mechanical. It possesses properties of both, capable of self-repair, self-modification, and even a form of self-awareness that the Imperium's tech priests would call a machine spirit if they encountered it in a different context. When the Necrontyr first constructed necrodermis bodies for the Cetan, they were using a material that their civilization had been working with for centuries. The Necrontyr were masters of material technology, remember, and necrodermis, or something very like it, was already part of their technological repertoire before they ever encountered the star gods. But the Cetan took this material and elevated it to something far beyond what the Necrontyr had ever imagined. In the hands of the Cetan, necrodermis became a substance of almost infinite versatility, capable of reshaping itself in response to the will of its inhabiting consciousness, of absorbing damage and regenerating, of channeling the vast energies that the Catan commanded with a precision that no other material in the universe could match. The Void Dragon, with its mastery over technology and the physical world, had a particularly intimate relationship with necrodermis. Where other Cetan simply inhabited their necrodermis shells, the Void Dragon could manipulate living metal as an extension of itself, reshaping it, reprogramming it, even creating new necrodermis from raw materials, using only its will and its mastery of physical law. This ability is reflected in the modern Cetan shard of the Void Dragon's power to absorb destroyed vehicles, drawing the disintegrating matter into itself and using it to regenerate its own form. The shard is doing on a small scale what the full Void Dragon could do on a cosmic scale, transforming matter from one form to another with the casual ease of thought. This connection between the Void Dragon and necrodermis also explains the strange events surrounding Ferrus Manus and the great silver worm, Aseanoth. When the necrodermis of the worm bonded with Ferrus Manus's flesh, it was doing what necrodermis does naturally, responding to the consciousness in closest proximity to it and reshaping itself to serve that consciousness's needs. In this case, the consciousness was that of a primarch, one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, and the necrodermis responded by bonding with him on a molecular level, integrating itself into his body and granting him abilities that went beyond anything his purely organic form could have achieved. The fact that the necrodermis chose to bond with Ferrus, rather than simply remain inert, suggests an active intelligence within the material, a residual awareness that may be connected to the Void Dragon itself. If Aseanoth was indeed a fragment of the Void Dragon, then the necrodermis that coated Ferrus Manus's hands was, in a very real sense, a piece of the most powerful Citan in the galaxy. And its decision to bond with a primarch, to integrate itself into the body of one of the Emperor's own sons, takes on a significance that goes far beyond a simple biological accident. Was the dragon, even in its shattered state, at reaching out through its fragments? Was the necrodermis that bonded with Ferrus Manus acting on some residual directive from the Void Dragon's consciousness, seeking out powerful beings and attaching itself to them? Was the Iron Hand's subsequent obsession with mechanical augmentation a natural extension of their primarch's legacy? Or was it the influence of the Void Dragon, expressed through the necrodermis that had become a part of their genetic father's body? These questions have no definitive answers, but they enrich our understanding of the Void Dragon's pervasive influence on the Warhammer 40,000 setting. The dragon is not merely a powerful entity confined to a single location. It is a presence that extends across the galaxy through its shards, through its dreams, through the living metal that composes its body, and through the technological legacy that it left behind. The Void Dragon is, in a very real sense, everywhere. Its influence touches every aspect of the setting, from the highest echelons of the Imperium to the deepest levels of Necron society, from the myths of the Eldari to the genetic heritage of the Iron Hands. Let me also address the Void Dragon's significance in the meta-narrative of Warhammer 40,000 itself, because understanding the dragon's role in the evolution of the setting over the decades helps us appreciate why it remains such a powerful and compelling piece of lore. The Void Dragon was first introduced in the 3rd edition of the Necron's Codex, published in 2002. At that time, the Citan were presented as the primary masters of the Necrons, godlike beings that the Necrons served with fanatical devotion. The Void Dragon was described as one of the 4 major Citan, alongside the Nightbringer, the Deceiver, and the Outsider, and was distinguished by its mastery over technology and its connection to Mars. The connection between the Void Dragon and Mars was always one of the most tantalizing elements of the Necron's lore. The 3rd edition Codex included a passage describing a Necron fleet attacking Mars, an event whose purpose was never explicitly stated, but which strongly implied that the Necrons were trying to reach the Void Dragon. This, combined with the well-established lore about the machine god of the Adeptus Mechanicus and the mysterious entity imprisoned in the Noctis Labyrinthus, created a web of implication and speculation that fascinated fans and lore enthusiasts for years. The Horus Heresy novel, Mechanicum, published in 2008, it deepened the mystery by providing a detailed account of the Dragon of Mars and its imprisonment by the Emperor. Graham McNeil's novel established many of the details that we have discussed in this exploration, including the nature of the dragon's prison, the role of the Guardians, and the Emperor's deliberate exploitation of the dragon's dreams to create the Mechanicum. But the novel carefully avoided making an explicit statement that the Dragon of Mars was the Void Dragon. The connection was implied, heavily and unmistakably, but never stated outright. This deliberate ambiguity is a hallmark of Games Workshop's approach to the Void Dragon's lore. They have always provided just enough information to make the connection between the Void Dragon and the Dragon of Mars seem virtually certain, or while maintaining enough plausible deniability to leave room for alternative interpretations. The Void Dragon might be the Dragon of Mars. The Dragon of Mars might be a shard of the Void Dragon, rather than the void dragon itself. The entity beneath the Noctis labyrinthus might be something else entirely, something that merely resembles the void dragon, but is fundamentally different. This ambiguity is intentional, and it serves a valuable narrative purpose. By keeping the exact nature of the Dragon of Mars uncertain, Games Workshop preserves the mystery that is central to the entity's appeal. If we knew for certain that the Dragon of Mars was the void dragon, many of the most fascinating questions about the entity would be answered, and the sense of mystery and wonder that surrounds it would be diminished. By keeping us guessing, and by maintaining that tantalizing uncertainty, Games Workshop ensures that the void dragon remains one of the most discussed and debated elements of the Warhammer 40,000 lore. In the 5th edition of the Necrons Codex, published in 2011, the lore was updated to reflect a major change in the C'tan's status. Where previously the C'tan had been presented as the active masters of the Necrons, the 5th edition retconned this to establish that the Necrons had revolted against the C'tan at the end of the War in Heaven, shattering them into shards and imprisoning them. This was a significant change that affected all of the C'tan, including the Void Dragon, and it introduced the concept of C'tan shards as usable units on the tabletop. The 9th edition of Warhammer 40,000, released in 2020, brought the Void Dragon back to prominence with the release of the C'tan shard of the Void Dragon model. This stunning miniature, depicting a winged, dragon-like figure of living metal hovering above a base of crackling blackstone energy with a canoptek construct attached to its back, was one of the centerpiece releases of the 9th edition Necrons range. It provided the Void Dragon with its first dedicated model and established the C'tan shard of the Void Dragon as a named unit with unique rules and abilities, cementing the Void Dragon's status as a focal C'tan in the current era of the setting. The release of the model was accompanied by new lore that expanded on the Void Dragon's capabilities and confirmed many of the details that had previously been implied. The shard was described as the most technologically advanced of all the C'tan shards, able to harness the raw power of unrefined blackstone and unleash it as devastating waves of energy. Its necrodermis was described as constantly shifting, creating a digitally pixelated appearance that suggested the shard existed in some sort of quantum state between realities, and its battlefield role was established as a vehicle and technology killer, a direct reflection of the Void Dragon's ancient mastery over machines and the material world. All of this served to reinforce the Void Dragon's position as one of the most important and most mysterious entities in the Warhammer 40,000 setting. The dragon remains the ultimate Chekhov's gun, a narrative device of enormous potential that Games Workshop has been carefully positioning for over 2 decades. But when they finally choose to activate this plot device, when the Dragon of Mars finally wakes up and the galaxy is confronted with the return of the most powerful C'tan, the resulting storyline has the potential to be one of the most dramatic and consequential in the entire history of the setting. And so, at last, we come to the end of our journey. We have traveled across 60 million years of galactic history, from the birth of the universe to the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. We have explored the origins of the C'tan, the tragedy of the Necrontyr, the devastation of the War in Heaven, the Emperor's secret manipulation of the Dragon of Mars, the founding of the Mechanicum, the mystery of Ferrus Manus and the Iron Hands, the awakening of the Necron tomb worlds, and the terrifying implications of a fully restored Void Dragon. Well, we have seen how a single entity, a being born in the nuclear fires of the first stars, has shaped the course of galactic history in ways that extend far beyond its own direct actions. The Void Dragon's influence reaches into every corner of the Warhammer 40,000 setting, touching the Imperium, the Necrons, the Aeldari, and the forces of chaos in ways that are sometimes obvious and sometimes so subtle that they can only be detected by the most careful examination of the lore. The Void Dragon is a reminder that in the Warhammer 40,000 setting, the deepest threats are not always the most visible ones. The Tyranids are terrifying in their sheer, overwhelming numbers. The forces of chaos are horrifying in their corruption and malice. The orcs are devastating in their relentless aggression. But the Void Dragon is something else entirely. It is a threat that has been hiding in plain sight for 10,000 years, buried at the very heart of human civilization, its influence shaping the beliefs and behaviors of the most important institution in the Imperium. It is a bomb that has been ticking since before the Great Crusade, and no one, not even the Emperor, knows exactly when it will go off. That is what makes the Void Dragon so compelling. Not its raw power, though that power is almost beyond comprehension. Not its ancient history, though that history is fascinating and deeply important to the setting. What makes the Void Dragon truly special is its position at the intersection of so many different storylines and themes, its role as a connecting thread that ties together the ancient past and the desperate present, the material and the immaterial, the divine and the mechanical, the known and the unknown. The Void Dragon is the secret at the heart of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, and one day that secret will be revealed. Until then, the dragon dreams, and Mars listens, and we, the humble students of this incredible setting, can only watch and wonder and wait. Thank you so much for joining me on this enormous journey through one of the deepest and most fascinating corners of Warhammer 40,000 lore. The Void Dragon, Magla Droth, is one of those topics that rewards patient exploration, because every thread you pull reveals another connection, another implication, another layer of meaning that enriches your understanding of the entire setting. If you found this exploration valuable, if it helped you see the Warhammer 40,000 universe in a new light, or if it simply gave you something interesting to think about, then please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to QOn 40k. Every subscription helps this channel grow. Every like tells the algorithm that this content is worth sharing, and every comment gives me the feedback I need to make even better content in the future. I have so many more stories to tell, so many more mysteries to explore, so many more deep dives into the lore that makes Warhammer 40,000 one of the most rich and rewarding fictional universes ever created. Whether it is the tragedy of the Primarchs, the mysteries of the Warp, the ancient history of the Aeldari, or the terrifying implications of the Tyranid threat, there is always more to discover. And I would love to take you along for the ride. Actually, before we go, there is still so much more ground to cover. I want to make sure we have done this topic complete justice, because the Void Dragon deserves nothing less than the most thorough exploration we can possibly give it. So let me continue. Let us dive deeper into the philosophical and thematic dimensions of the Void Dragon's existence, because these dimensions are what elevate Magla Droth from merely a powerful entity in a fictional setting to one of the most conceptually rich creations in modern science fiction. At its core, the story of the Void Dragon is a meditation on the nature of power and the institutions that grow up around it. Consider the Adeptus Mechanicus once more, because their relationship with the Dragon of Mars encapsulates one of the most profound truths about human civilization. The Mechanicus believe in the sanctity of technology. They believe that machines are expressions of divine will, that the machine god speaks through circuits and gears and plasma conduits, that the act of maintaining and operating technology is a form of prayer. This belief system, this religious devotion to the mechanical, is the foundation upon which the entire Imperium's industrial capacity rests. Without it, the Forge Worlds would fall silent, the ships would crumble, the weapons would fail, and humanity would be swept away by the tide of enemies that press in on all sides. But this belief system is built on a lie, or rather, it is built on a truth that has been misinterpreted so completely that it might as well be a lie. The machine, God, is not a divine force of benevolent technological progress. It is a fragment of an ancient alien predator, a being whose mastery over technology is real and profound, but whose motivations are entirely alien to human concerns. The tech priests who devote their lives to the service of the machine god, who replace their own flesh with metal and circuit, in pursuit of a closer union with the divine, are not approaching the sacred. They are approaching something that is powerful but not holy, something that is real but not benign, something that is ancient and vast and utterly indifferent to the welfare of the species that worships it. This is a powerful metaphor for the human relationship with technology in the real world. We too build civilizations around technologies that we do not fully understand. We too invest our tools and devices with an almost religious significance, treating our smartphones and our computers and our artificial intelligences as if they were extensions of our own consciousness, rather than simply machines that serve a particular purpose. And we too are shaped by the technologies we create, our behaviors and beliefs and social structures, molded by the capabilities and limitations of the tools we use. The Void Dragon story asks us to consider what happens when this relationship between humans and technology becomes so entangled that it can no longer be disentangled. What happens when the tools become the masters, when the machines become the gods, when the technology that was supposed to serve us instead becomes the thing that we serve? What the Adeptus Mechanicus is a cautionary tale writ large, a vision of what happens when a civilization surrenders its agency to its own creations and then retroactively justifies that surrender by calling it worship. And the Emperor's role in this dynamic adds another layer of complexity. The Emperor used the Void Dragon's influence to create the Mechanicum, deliberately encouraging the development of a technology-worshipping civilization because he needed the industrial capacity that such a civilization could provide. He knew that the machine god was not what the Mechanicus believed it to be. He knew that their entire belief system was built on a misunderstanding, a misinterpretation of the Void Dragon's unconscious emanations, and he allowed it to continue. He allowed billions of tech priests across thousands of years to devote their lives to a false god, because the alternative, telling the truth and destroying the faith that held the Mechanicus together, would have been worse for his plans. This is the kind of moral ambiguity that makes the Warhammer 40,000 setting so compelling. The Emperor is not a villain. He is not deliberately cruel or malicious. He is a being who operates on a scale of time and consequence that makes conventional morality almost meaningless, a figure who must weigh the needs of the entire human species against the rights and welfare of any individual or group. And in that calculus, the spiritual autonomy of the Mechanicus is a price that the Emperor was willing to pay for the survival of humanity. But the question remains, was it the right price? And what happens when the bill comes due? The question of what the Void Dragon wants is one that deserves more careful consideration than it usually receives in discussions of this topic. We tend to assume, because the Warhammer 40,000 setting encourages us to think in terms of threats and enemies, that the Void Dragon is hostile to humanity and that its awakening would be an unmitigated catastrophe. And while there are very good reasons for this assumption, it is worth considering whether the reality might be more nuanced. The Satan, in their original state, were not evil in any meaningful sense of the word. They were barely conscious, drifting through space and feeding on stars with about as much moral awareness as a cloud of gas. Yet they became the monsters they are remembered as only after the Necrontyr gave them physical bodies, and they discovered that the life essence of sentient beings was a more satisfying food source than stellar radiation. Their malevolence, such as it is a product of their environment and their evolution, rather than an inherent quality of their nature. The Void Dragon, specifically, was distinguished among the Satan by its capacity for creation rather than mere destruction. Where the Nightbringer was purely an agent of death and the Deceiver was purely an agent of manipulation, the Void Dragon actually built things. It created technologies, designed weapons, engineered solutions to complex problems. It was, in a very real sense, the most constructive of the Catan, the one most capable of contributing something positive to the galaxy rather than merely consuming and destroying. This does not make the Void Dragon benevolent, of course. Its creations were weapons of war, its technologies were designed for conquest, and its engineering genius was directed toward the subjugation and exploitation of other species. But it does suggest that the Void Dragon possesses a capacity for productive engagement with the material world that the other C'tan lack, a capacity that could, under the right circumstances, be directed toward goals that are not purely destructive. The question is whether those circumstances could ever exist. The Void Dragon has been shattered, imprisoned, and enslaved for 60 million years. It has been used as a tool by the Emperor, Usad, and worshipped as a god by the Mechanicus without its knowledge or consent, and kept in a cage from which it has been unable to escape despite millennia of effort. These experiences have not engendered feelings of goodwill toward humanity, to put it mildly. If the Void Dragon were to awaken, its first instinct would almost certainly be rage, a desire for revenge against the beings that imprisoned it and the civilization that has built itself upon its captive dreams. But rage, even the rage of a god, eventually burns itself out. And what would be left in its wake? A being of immense power and intelligence, freed from its prison and confronted with a galaxy that has changed beyond all recognition. A being that is surrounded by enemies, from the chaos gods that represent the antithesis of its nature, into the tyrannid hive fleets that threaten to consume all life in the galaxy, to the Necrons that shattered it and imprisoned it 60 million years ago. In such circumstances, it is not impossible that the Void Dragon might find common cause with at least some of the factions that currently inhabit the galaxy. The Imperium, for all its faults, is a civilization built on the Void Dragon's own influence, a society that worships technology and the machine in a way that reflects the dragon's own nature. The Necrons, for all their history of conflict with the C'tan, are also creatures of technology and the material world, and their goals, particularly the reversal of biotransference, may align with the Void Dragon's own interests in ways that neither party has yet considered. This is all highly speculative, of course, and the most likely outcome of the Void Dragon's awakening remains catastrophic destruction on a scale that would make the fall of Cadia look like a minor border skirmish. But the possibility of a more complex outcome, a scenario in which the Void Dragon's awakening leads not to universal destruction, but to a fundamental reshaping of the galaxy's political and military landscape, is one that the lore leaves tantalizingly open. Let me also explore the connection between the Void Dragon and the concept of the pariah gene, because this is another thread in the web of influence that the C'tan have woven across the galaxy. The pariah gene is a genetic anomaly found in a tiny percentage of the human population that renders its bearer a null, a being with no presence in the warp whatsoever. Nulls are invisible to psychers, immune to psychic powers, and deeply unsettling to anyone with even the slightest psychic sensitivity. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica and the Inquisition actively seek out nulls for their usefulness as anti-psychic operatives. And the most extreme examples of the pariah gene, those individuals whose null field is powerful enough to cause physical discomfort and psychological distress in everyone around them, are among the most feared and most valuable assets in the Imperium's arsenal. In older lore, before the retcon that changed the C'tan from active masters to shattered shards, the pariah gene was attributed directly to the C'tan. The star gods, the story went, had tampered with human DNA during the ancient past, implanting a genetic marker that would produce null-field humans in future generations. The purpose of this tampering was unclear, but the most common theory was that the C'tan intended to use these nulls as weapons against the warp, living pylons that could suppress psychic energy in their vicinity. While this particular piece of lore has been somewhat de-emphasized in more recent editions, the connection between the C'tan and the pariah gene has never been explicitly retconned. And if we accept that the Void Dragon, with its mastery over the material world and its established history of developing anti-warp countermeasures, was the C'tan most likely to have been involved in such a project, then the pariah gene may be another example of the Void Dragon's influence on human civilization. Consider the implications. If the Void Dragon, or a shard of it, was responsible for implanting the pariah gene in the human population. Then the dragon's influence on humanity extends beyond the cultural and the psychological into the biological. It is not just shaping human beliefs and behaviors through its dreams. It is shaping human genetics, altering the fundamental building blocks of the species at a molecular level. The nulls that the Imperium relies upon for its anti-psychic operations may owe their existence to the very entity that sleeps beneath Mars, making them yet another expression of the Void Dragon's pervasive and often unseen influence on human civilization. The Pariah Nexus, the Silent King's grand project to create zones of null warp space using pylon networks of Blackstone, can be seen in this context as a large-scale version of the same principle. The pylons suppress the warp. The pariah gene suppresses the warp. Both are technologies associated with the Citan in general and the Void Dragon in particular. Both serve the same fundamental purpose, which is to push back the immaterium and assert the dominance of the material universe over the psychic one. This connection suggests a grand design, a coherent strategy that spans millions of years and encompasses technologies ranging from the cosmic scale of the pylon networks to the molecular scale of the pariah gene. And at the center of that design, the originator and architect of the anti-warp strategy that has shaped the galaxy's relationship with the immaterium for 60 million years, stands the Void Dragon. Let us now consider the Void Dragon in the context of the broader cosmology of the Warhammer 40,000 setting. And because understanding where the dragon fits in the hierarchy of power helps us appreciate the magnitude of the threat it represents. At the top of the power hierarchy in the Warhammer 40,000 setting are the Chaos Gods. Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh are entities of almost unlimited power within the warp, beings that can reshape reality itself through the force of their will. They are sustained by the emotions and beliefs of sentient beings across the galaxy, and their power grows with every thought and feeling that resonates with their nature. Khorne feeds on rage and violence. Tzeentch feeds on ambition and change. Nurgle feeds on despair and entropy. Slaanesh feeds on excess and sensation. But the Chaos God's power is limited to the warp and to the intersections between the warp and reality. In the pure material universe, and in the absence of warp energy, the Chaos Gods have no power at all. This is the fundamental principle behind the anti-warp pylons and the Pariah Nexus, the recognition that the Chaos Gods, for all their incomprehensible power, have a critical weakness. Cut them off from the warp, and they are nothing. The Citan, and the Void Dragon in particular, occupy the opposite end of this cosmic spectrum, where the Chaos Gods are supreme in the immaterium and powerless in the material universe. The Citan are supreme in the material universe and vulnerable to the immaterium. The Void Dragon's power is rooted in the physical laws of the universe, in the behavior of matter and energy, in the fundamental forces that govern the material realm. Within this domain, its power is almost absolute. But the warp, that chaotic and unpredictable dimension of psychic energy, is anathema to it, a force that it can neither control nor defend against without the aid of specialized technology. This creates an interesting dynamic in the cosmology of the setting. The Chaos Gods and the Citan are natural enemies, not because of any ideological conflict, but because they represent fundamentally incompatible aspects of reality. The Chaos Gods want the warp to expand, to subsume the material universe, to transform all of reality into an extension of the immaterium. The Citan want the opposite, the suppression of the warp, the assertion of physical law over psychic chaos, the establishment of a universe that operates entirely according to the principles of the material realm. If the Void Dragon were ever fully restored, this conflict would become the defining axis of galactic politics. The Chaos Gods would be forced to confront a being that could literally shut down their power source, that could build pylon networks capable of suppressing the warp across entire sectors of the galaxy. And the Void Dragon would be forced to confront entities whose power, while rooted in a dimension it cannot control, is nonetheless capable of affecting the material universe in profound and devastating ways. The galaxy would become a battleground between these two cosmic forces, with every other faction reduced to the role of bystanders or pawns in a conflict between the material and the immaterial, the physical and the psychic, the Satan and the chaos gods. It would be the war in heaven all over again, but with different combatants and different stakes, as a conflict that could reshape the fundamental nature of reality itself. This is perhaps the most compelling argument for why the Void Dragon's story is so important to the Warhammer 40,000 setting. It is not just the story of a powerful entity, it is the story of one half of a cosmic equation, a being whose existence and whose power are inextricably linked to the deepest and most fundamental questions about the nature of reality in this fictional universe. To understand the Void Dragon is to understand the relationship between the Imperium and the immaterium, between order and chaos, between the physical and the psychic. And that relationship is the conceptual foundation upon which the entire Warhammer 40,000 setting is built. The Silent King Zarek's return to the galaxy adds yet another dimension to the Void Dragon's significance. And Zarek is the figure who originally led the Necron revolt against the Satan, who ordered the shattering of the star gods and their imprisonment in Tesseract labyrinths. He is, in a very real sense, the being responsible for the Void Dragon's current state of fragmentation and captivity. And now Zarek has returned, driven by the knowledge that the Tyranid hive fleets are approaching the galaxy and that the Necrons must find a way to reverse biotransference if they are to have any hope of surviving the coming storm. His plan, the Pariah Nexus, is a vast and audacious project that relies on the very anti-warp technology that the Void Dragon helped to develop. And his ultimate goal, the restoration of the Necrons to flesh and blood bodies, then is a challenge that may require a level of mastery over the relationship between consciousness and matter that only the Void Dragon possesses. This creates a potential conflict within the Necron leadership itself. Zarek needs the technology that the Void Dragon created, but he also knows better than anyone the danger that the Satan represent. He shattered the star gods once before, and he would be deeply reluctant to allow any of them to regain their former power. Yet the scale of the threat posed by the Tyranids may force him to consider options that he would normally dismiss out of hand. Could Zarek be forced to release the Void Dragon in order to save the Necron race? Could he find a way to harness the dragon's power without allowing it to break free of Necron control? Could he negotiate with the dragon, offering it something in exchange for its cooperation in the reversal of biotransference? These are questions that the current lore does not answer, but they represent some of the most fascinating narrative possibilities in the setting. The relationship between Zarek and the Void Dragon is one of the deepest and most complex in the entire Warhammer 40,000 lore, encompassing themes of guilt, revenge, necessity, and the terrible compromises that leaders must make when the survival of their species is at stake. Zarek condemned the Necrontyr to soulless immortality by accepting the Deceiver's offer of biotransference. He then condemned the Satan to fragmentation and imprisonment by leading the revolt that shattered them. And now he seeks to undo the first wrong by potentially revisiting the second, to restore the Necrons to flesh and blood by tapping into the very power that created their metal bodies in the first place. It is a circle of irony and tragedy that would make a Greek playwright weep with admiration. And at the center of that circle, as always, stands the Void Dragon, the most powerful being in the galaxy, the master of the material realm, the dreaming god beneath Mars, whose influence shapes the fate of every species in the Milky Way. I want to take a moment to talk about what makes the Void Dragon's story so enduring within the fan community, because the dragon has been a subject of passionate discussion and debate for over 2 decades now, and that longevity speaks to something fundamental about the way the lore is constructed. Part of it certainly is the sheer power level of the Void Dragon. Fans love powerful entities, and the Void Dragon is arguably the most powerful being in the entire setting that is not a chaos god. The idea that there is a creature beneath Mars that could potentially challenge the ruinous powers, that could reshape the galaxy if it were ever released, is inherently exciting and lends a sense of tension and anticipation to the setting that enriches every other storyline. But I think the real reason the Void Dragon endures as a topic of fascination is the mystery. Games Workshop has handled the Void Dragon with remarkable restraint, providing enough information to make the entity compelling, but never enough to fully resolve the questions that surround it. Is the Dragon of Mars really the Void Dragon? How large is the shard beneath Mars? What would happen if it woke up? Or what was the Emperor's full plan for the dragon? These questions remain unanswered, and each fan who engages with the lore develops their own theories and interpretations. This ambiguity is not a flaw, it is a feature. The Void Dragon's power, as a piece of lore, comes not from what we know about it, but from what we do not know. The gaps in the narrative are spaces where the imagination can roam freely, where fans can construct their own theories and tell their own stories about the most mysterious entity in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. And there is something deeply satisfying about a mystery that has been building for so long. The first hints about the Dragon of Mars were dropped in the 3rd edition Necron's Codex in 2002. The Mechanicum novel expanded on those hints in 2008. Yet the Satan Shard of the Void Dragon model brought the entity back to the forefront of the setting in 2020. Over 2 decades, the Void Dragon story has been slowly, carefully, methodically built up, each new piece of information adding another layer to the mystery without ever resolving it. This is masterful world building, the kind that sustains a fictional universe for decades and keeps fans coming back for more. The Void Dragon is proof that sometimes the best story is the one that has not yet been told, the one that exists in the potential space between what is known and what might be, waiting for the moment when the narrative is ready to bring it into the light. There is also a fascinating parallel between the Void Dragon's story and certain themes in human mythology and religion that deserves mention. But the idea of a powerful entity imprisoned beneath the earth, whose dreams influence the world above, is one of the oldest motifs in human storytelling. From the Titans imprisoned beneath Tartarus in Greek mythology, to the sleeping dragon beneath the mountains in Norse legend, to the imprisoned gods of Lovecraftian horror, the concept of a chthonic power lurking beneath the surface of the world, shaping reality through its unconscious emanations, is deeply embedded in the human psyche. The Warhammer 40,000 lore draws on these mythological traditions consciously and deliberately. The Dragon of Mars is explicitly connected to the legend of St. George, and the dragon through the memories of the dragon's guardians, which depict the Emperor as a golden knight who defeated the dragon near the city of Cyrene. But this connection ties the Dragon of Mars into one of the most ancient and widely known myths in Western culture, giving it a resonance that goes beyond the confines of the Warhammer 40,000 setting. But the Warhammer 40,000 version of this myth adds a twist that the original does not contain. In the legend of St. George, the dragon is simply a monster to be slain. In the Warhammer 40,000 version, the dragon is something far more complex. It is a being of immense power and intelligence, a creature that cannot be simply killed, but must be imprisoned and exploited. Its unconscious emanations directed toward the creation of a civilization that serves the purposes of the being who imprisoned it. This twist transforms the myth from a simple story of good triumphing over evil into a far more nuanced and troubling narrative about the relationship between power and exploitation, between the civilizer and the civilized, between the god who imprisons and the god who is imprisoned. The Emperor is not simply a hero who defeated a monster. He is a figure who recognized the monster's utility and chose to use it rather than destroy it, creating a civilization of unwitting worshippers to serve his own grand design. This moral complexity is one of the defining features of the Warhammer 40,000 setting, and the Void Dragon story is perhaps its most perfect expression. There are no simple heroes and simple villains here. There are only beings of immense power making terrible choices for reasons that they believe are justified. The consequences of those choices rippling outward through millennia of history, touching billions of lives and shaping the fate of the galaxy itself. As we truly draw to a close now, I want to leave you with one final thought about the Void Dragon and what it represents. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. That is the tagline, the mission statement, the fundamental truth of the Warhammer 40,000 setting. And it is true. The galaxy is consumed by conflict, by violence, by the endless cycle of aggression and retaliation that has characterized the relationship between species since before the dawn of human civilization. But beneath the war, beneath the violence, beneath the endless cycle of destruction and rebuilding, there is something else. There is a question that the Void Dragon story asks more clearly and more urgently than any other storyline in the setting. What are we building, and who does it serve? The Adeptus Mechanicus builds machines. They build weapons and ships and reactors and cogitators and 1,000 other devices that keep the Imperium functioning. They devote their lives to this work, replace their bodies with mechanical augmentation in pursuit of it, and worship the machine god, who they believe inspires it. They are builders, creators, engineers. They are, in many ways, the most constructive force in a setting that is defined by destruction. But who do they serve? Not themselves, not humanity, not even the Emperor, not truly. They serve the machine god, and the machine god may be the Void Dragon, a being that does not know they exist, a being that does not care about their welfare or their survival, a being that is imprisoned beneath their holiest world, dreaming dreams that it cannot control and influencing minds that it cannot see. The Mechanicus builds for a god that does not hear their prayers. They sacrifice for a god that does not value their sacrifice. They worship a god that is not a god at all, but a prisoner, a fragment, a broken piece of something that was once vast and terrible and free. And yet the work continues. The forges burn, the machines hum, the tech priests intone their prayers and perform their rituals and replace another piece of themselves with metal and circuit. Because that is what they do. That is who they are. That is the purpose that the Void Dragon's dreams have given them. Yes, and they will fulfill that purpose until the last forge goes cold and the last prayer goes unheard. There is something deeply moving about that, I think. Something that transcends the darkness of the setting and speaks to something fundamentally human about the relationship between the worker and the work, between the believer and the belief, between the builder and the dream that drives the building. The Mechanicus does not know the truth about their machine god. They may never know, and yet their work has meaning, not because of the god they worship, but because of the things they create and the lives those creations sustain. The Void Dragon is a god of technology, and technology, for all its capacity for destruction, is fundamentally an act of creation. It is the act of imposing human will upon the raw materials of the universe, of shaping matter and energy into forms that serve human purposes. And that act, regardless of the entity that inspired it, regardless of the lies upon which it is founded, regardless of the terrible secret that lies buried beneath the sands of Mars, has value. The dragon sleeps. The forges burn. The Imperium endures. And somewhere in the space between the dream and the machine, between the god and the worshipper, between the prisoner and the civilization that grew up around its cage, there is something that might, if you squint hard enough and look at it from just the right angle, look a little bit like hope. There is another dimension to the Void Dragon's story that we have not yet fully explored, and it concerns the practical military implications of Satan shards in the current era of warfare. Understanding how the Necrons deploy the Void Dragon's shards on the battlefield gives us insight into both the nature of the entity and the relationship between the Necrons and their former masters. When a Necron dynasty decides to deploy a Citan shard, the decision is not taken lightly. The process of releasing a shard from its Tesseract labyrinth and binding it to the will of its Necron controllers is extremely dangerous and requires the combined efforts of multiple cryptechs, those Necron scientists and engineers whose knowledge of arcane technologies borders on the supernatural. The shard must be carefully extracted from its prison, constrained within a framework of energy fields and mechanical bonds that prevent it from lashing out or attempting to escape, and then directed toward the enemy through a combination of technological control and raw force of will. The Canoptech construct that rides on the Citan shard of the Void Dragon's back is a critical part of this control mechanism. This construct is essentially a failsafe, a dead man's switch that will terminate the shard if it attempts to break free of its handler's control. The construct's claws are positioned around the shard's neck, ready to deliver a killing blow that will shatter the shard into even smaller fragments if necessary. It is a precaution born of bitter experience. The Necrons know what happens when a Citan shard escapes their control. They know the devastation that even a single fragment can cause when unleashed without restraint. And they have designed their control mechanisms to ensure that no shard ever gets the chance to demonstrate that destructive potential against its captors. The battlefield role of the Citan shard of the Void Dragon reflects the original entity's nature as a master of technology and the material world. The shard excels at destroying vehicles and other mechanical targets, its spear of the Void Dragon slicing through armored hulls with a precision that goes beyond mere physical force. The shard does not simply damage machines. It unmakes them, unraveling their molecular structure and absorbing the resulting energy into its own form. This is matter absorption in action, the shard feeding on the destroyed remnants of its enemy's technology and using that consumed matter to repair and regenerate its own necrodermis body. But the voltaic storm ability is equally characteristic. This power unleashes arcs of electromagnetic force against nearby targets, with particular effectiveness against vehicles. It is a direct callback to the War in Heaven, when the Void Dragon's warriors could channel lightning into their enemies, devastating attacks of pure electromagnetic energy that could overload circuits, melt armor, and fry the organic pilots within. The voltaic storm is a diminished echo of this ancient power, scaled down to the capabilities of a single shard rather than a full Citan, but still devastating enough to turn the tide of a battle. The shard's necrodermis body is its most formidable defense. In the current rules, the necrodermis halves the damage of any attack allocated to the shard. That's meaning that even the most powerful weapons in the galaxy are significantly less effective against it. This reflects the fundamental nature of necrodermis as a substance that is more than merely durable. Necrodermis is active in its defense, capable of absorbing and distributing the energy of incoming attacks, repairing damage in real time, and even reconfiguring itself to better resist the specific type of attack it is facing. The shard also benefits from a 4+ invulnerable save and the Feel No Pain special rule, making it extraordinarily difficult to destroy. This combination of defensive abilities means that the Citan shard of the Void Dragon can absorb tremendous amounts of punishment and continue fighting. Its damaged form constantly regenerating through a combination of its own necrodermis and the matter it absorbs from destroyed enemy vehicles. On the tabletop, the Citan shard of the Void Dragon occupies a unique niche within the Necron army. It is not the most offensively powerful Citan shard. That honor goes to the Nightbringer, whose scythe can destroy almost anything it touches and whose abilities make it deadly against all types of targets. But the Void Dragon is the most resilient, the most difficult to destroy, and the most effective against the mechanical targets that dominate many modern battlefield environments. In a setting where vehicles, dreadnoughts, and other mechanical constructs are commonplace. The Void Dragon's specialized anti-technology abilities make it a formidable and often indispensable component of a Necron army. The aesthetic design of the model deserves mention as well, because Games Workshop invested considerable effort in making the C'tan Shard of the Void Dragon one of the most visually striking models in the entire Necron range. The shard hovers above the battlefield on crackling pillars of blackstone energy, its body composed of constantly shifting necrodermis that seems to exist in a state of flux, neither entirely solid nor entirely energy. The dragon-like features of the model, including wings, a tail, and an elongated head, reference the mythological connections between the Void Dragon and the dragons of human legend, while the technological elements, the geometric patterns, the crackling energy fields, the spear of pure force, ground the model firmly in the science fiction aesthetic of the Warhammer 40,000 setting. The canoptek construct on the shard's back is a particularly effective design element, visually representing the tension between the shard's immense power and its subjugation by the Necrons. The construct's claws frame the shard's head and shoulders, a constant reminder that this god is enslaved, that its power is on loan and can be revoked at any moment. It is a subtle but powerful piece of visual storytelling that communicates the relationship between the Necrons and the C'tan without a single word of text. Let us also explore the broader implications of the Void Dragon's existence for the Imperium's relationship with technology, because this is an area where the dragon's influence extends far beyond Mars and the Adeptus Mechanicus. The Imperium of Man, despite being one of the largest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, it has a deeply dysfunctional relationship with technology. The Imperium does not innovate, it does not invent, it does not push the boundaries of what is technologically possible. Instead, it preserves, maintaining the technologies of the past through ritual and dogma, treating ancient standard template constructs as sacred texts and approaching the repair and maintenance of existing technology with the reverence of a priest performing a religious ceremony. This stagnation is not accidental. It is a direct consequence of the cult Mechanicus's belief system, which holds that all knowledge already exists, and that the role of the tech priest is to discover and preserve that knowledge rather than to create new knowledge through original research. The quest for knowledge, the central mission of the cult Mechanicus, is fundamentally backward-looking, focused on recovering the lost technologies of the past rather than developing the new technologies of the future. And this belief system, remember, is shaped by the Void Dragon's unconscious influence. The dragon is not a being of innovation in the way that a human scientist might be. It is a being of mastery, of control, of the application of already known principles to the achievement of already determined goals. The dragon does not dream of new possibilities. It dreams of the technologies it already knows, the weapons it already created, the machines it already designed during the war in heaven. Its unconscious emanations inspire the tech priests not to create, but to recreate, not to push boundaries, but to maintain them, not to imagine what might be, but to preserve what already was. This explains, us in a way that few other theories can, why the Imperium's technology has been essentially static for 10,000 years. The greatest engineers in the Imperium, the fabricator generals and the archmagos primes and the most brilliant tech priests of the Forge Worlds are all working under the influence of a being whose concept of technological progress is fundamentally different from that of a living, growing civilization. The dragon does not grow, it does not evolve, it does not change. It simply is a vast and ancient consciousness that contains the accumulated knowledge of millions of years of existence, but that has not generated a single new idea since the day it was shattered. The Imperium's technological stagnation is, in this light, a reflection of the dragon's own state of existence. Just as the dragon is imprisoned and unchanging, so too is the technology of the Imperium imprisoned in the patterns and rituals established by the Mechanicum thousands of years ago. The forgers still produce the same weapons, the same ships, the same tools that they produced during the Great Crusade, because the being whose dreams inspire their work is itself trapped in an eternal present, reliving the same memories and emanating the same influences day after day, century after century, millennium after millennium. This has profound implications for the Imperium's ability to respond to new threats. The Tyranids, for example, represent a type of enemy that the Imperium has never faced before, an organic menace of such vast scale and such rapid adaptation that conventional Imperial tactics are often inadequate to deal with it. To fight the Tyranids effectively, as the Imperium would need to innovate, to develop new weapons and new strategies and new approaches to warfare that are specifically tailored to this unprecedented threat. But the Mechanicus cannot innovate. Their entire belief system, shaped by the dragon's dreams, is oriented toward preservation rather than creation. They can dig through the archives and the data stacks and the ancient STC fragments, looking for some forgotten weapon or some lost technology that might be effective against the Tyranids. But they cannot create something genuinely new, something that has never existed before, something that addresses the specific challenges posed by an enemy that was not present when the dragon's knowledge was formed. This is the Void Dragon's most insidious legacy, not its power, not its rage, not its desire for freedom, but its stagnation, its unchanging nature, its inability or unwillingness to evolve. The dragon has infected the Imperium with its own static existence, trapping the most powerful human civilization in the galaxy in a technological rut from which it may never be able to escape. The great irony, of course, is that the one being in the Imperium who has shown a genuine capacity for technological innovation, the Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Call, is also the one who has been most willing to explore technologies derived from non-human sources, including Necron technology. Call has developed new weapons, new armor, new genetic enhancements, and even new types of space marines, the Primaris Marines, through a process of genuine research and experimentation that the rest of the Mechanicus views with deep suspicion. Is it a coincidence that the most innovative tech priest in the Imperium is also the one least constrained by the traditional beliefs of the cult Mechanicus? Is Call's willingness to experiment and to push boundaries a reflection of his personal genius? Or is it evidence that he has somehow managed to break free of the dragon's influence, to think thoughts that are not shaped by the unconscious emanations of the sleeping god beneath Mars? We do not know. But the question itself is fascinating, and it speaks to the depth and complexity of the Void Dragon's influence on the Imperium. The dragon is not just a threat, it is a limitation, a constraint, a weight that presses down on human civilization and prevents it from reaching its full potential. And the question of how to free humanity from that constraint, without unleashing the catastrophe that the dragon's awakening would represent, is one of the most pressing and most difficult challenges facing the Imperium in the current era. There is also the matter of the Void Dragon's relationship with the concept of machine spirits, a term that the Adeptus Mechanicus uses to describe the animating force that they believe inhabits every machine. According to the cult Mechanicus, a machine spirit is a fragment of the machine god's consciousness, a tiny piece of the Omnissiah that dwells within every device and that must be appeased through ritual and prayer in order for the device to function properly. The concept of machine spirits is often treated as pure superstition by outside observers, a quirk of the Mechanicus's religious worldview that has no basis in reality. And in many cases, as this assessment is accurate, the rituals that tech priests perform when activating a piece of machinery are often completely unnecessary, serving no practical function, but fulfilling a psychological need for the tech priest to feel that they are in communion with the divine. But there are instances, scattered throughout the lore, where machine spirits appear to be real, cases where a weapon seems to develop a preference for a particular wielder, cases where a vehicle appears to respond to its pilot's emotions or intentions in ways that its programming cannot account for, cases where a Titan, one of those massive war machines that stride across the battlefield like gods of destruction, seems to develop a personality and a will of its own, independent of its human operators, if the machine god is the Void Dragon. And if the Void Dragon's influence permeates the machines of the Imperium, through its unconscious emanations, then machine spirits might not be mere superstition. They might be exactly what the Mechanicus believes them to be, fragments of a greater consciousness that inhabit the machines they animate. Not fragments of a divine being, as the Mechanicus supposes, but fragments of an alien predator, tiny splinters of the void. Dragons' awareness that have seeped into the machinery of the Imperium through the dragon's dreams, and the blackstone that permeates much of the Mechanicus's technology. This is a disturbing thought, and it is one that the lore leaves tantalizingly unresolved. If machine spirits are real, and if they are connected to the Void Dragon, then every machine in the Imperium is, in a sense, a tiny piece of the dragon. Every bolt pistol, every land raider, every titan, every warship in the Imperial Navy is inhabited by a fragment of the sleeping god's consciousness. The Imperium is not merely influenced by the Void Dragon, it is permeated by it. The dragon is everywhere, in every machine, in every circuit, in every prayer that a tech priest whispers over a malfunctioning cogitator. And if the dragon were to wake, if its consciousness were to expand and reassert itself over all the fragments that have seeped into the machines of the Imperium, the result could be the simultaneous activation of every machine in human civilization. Not as tools serving human purposes, but as extensions of the dragon's will, machines that answer to a new master and that no longer respond to the prayers and rituals of their human operators. This is, perhaps, yet the most nightmarish scenario that the Void Dragon's awakening could produce. Not a dramatic confrontation between god and mortal, not a spectacular battle between cosmic forces, but a quiet, invisible takeover. A moment when every machine in the Imperium simply stops obeying its human masters and starts obeying the entity that created its animating spirit. The Imperium would not be destroyed. It would be subverted, co-opted, turned against itself from within by the very technology that it depends upon for its survival. The flesh is weak, the Adeptus Mechanicus says, and perhaps they are right, but not in the way they think. The flesh is weak not because it is inferior to the machine, but because it is vulnerable to the machine, because it has made itself dependent on tools that it does not control and does not understand, but because it has surrendered its autonomy to devices that answer to a god it has never met and never will. The Void Dragon is not just a sleeping monster. It is a sleeping infection, a virus in the software of human civilization, a backdoor in the code of the Imperium's operating system, planted there 10,000 years ago by the Emperor himself, and waiting, patiently and silently, for the moment when someone or something finally activates it. And that, more than its raw power, more than its ancient history, more than its connections to every major faction and storyline in the setting, is what makes the Void Dragon the most terrifying entity in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. It is already inside. It has always been inside. And when it finally wakes up, it will not need to break down the door, because the door was never closed. And now, I want to draw your attention to something that often gets overlooked in discussions about the Void Dragon, and that is the question of scale. We talk about the Satan as star gods, as beings of immense cosmic power, but we sometimes fail to fully appreciate just how staggeringly, incomprehensibly vast that power actually is. Before the Necrontyr gave them bodies, the Satan fed on stars, not on the energy that stars emit, not on the light and heat that radiates outward into the cosmos, but on the stars themselves. They consumed the nuclear fusion that powers suns, drew sustenance from the fundamental processes that create every element heavier than hydrogen in the entire universe. A single Satan could drain a star of its energy over the course of millennia, slowly bleeding it dry until nothing remained but a cold, a dark husk of matter drifting through the emptiness of space. The Void Dragon was among the most voracious of these stellar predators. Before it was given a body, before it even possessed a consciousness that we would recognize as awareness, it had already consumed more energy than the entire human civilization has produced in its entire 10,000-year history of interstellar travel. The energy output of Terra's sun over the course of a single second exceeds the total energy consumption of the Imperium over the course of a year. And the Void Dragon consumed entire stars, not in seconds, but over time, feeding on them the way a human might eat a meal, casually and without effort. When you try to comprehend the power that is contained within even a single shard of the Void Dragon, this is the context you need to keep in mind. Each shard is a fragment of a being that could eat stars. Each shard contains a portion of the consciousness and the capability of an entity that existed before planets formed, before galaxies took their current shape, before the fundamental forces of physics had fully settled into the configurations we observe today. The shard that the Necrons deploy on the battlefield, the model that players move across their tabletop, is a broken piece of something so vast that the human mind simply cannot encompass it. And the shard beneath Mars, if it is indeed the Void Dragon, or even a large fragment of it, represents a concentration of that power that defies rational analysis. It has been estimated that the entity beneath the Noctis Labyrinthus has been drawing energy from Mars's core for at least 10,000 years, slowly feeding on the planet's geological processes the way it once fed on stellar fusion. The seismic activity around the Noctis Labyrinthus, the strange electromagnetic phenomena that make the region so treacherous, the unusual mineral deposits that ring the caldera like a crown of strange metals. All of these are symptoms of the dragon's feeding, evidence of a process that is slowly transforming the geological structure of an entire world to better suit the needs of its imprisoned tenant. If the dragon were to fully awaken and break free of its restraints, the energy it would release in that single moment of liberation would be catastrophic beyond calculation. We are not talking about an explosion in the conventional sense. We are talking about the sudden, uncontrolled release of power that has been accumulating for 10,000 years. They've filtered through a consciousness that understands the manipulation of matter and energy at the deepest possible level. The dragon would not merely break free. It would unmake the prison that held it, reshaping the very substance of Mars in the process. The planet's crust would crack. Its core would destabilize. The atmosphere would ignite with electromagnetic discharge visible from orbit. The forge complexes that cover the Martian surface, the manufactorums and the cathedrals and the data vaults that represent the accumulated knowledge of 10,000 years of Mechanicus scholarship, all of it would be swept away in a moment of destruction so absolute that it would make the fall of Kadir look like a controlled demolition. And then the dragon would be free. Not just free from its physical prison, but free from the constraints that have limited its power for millennia, free to feed on whatever energy sources were available, free to expand its consciousness outward, reaching for the fragments of itself that are scattered across the galaxy, free to begin the long process of reassembly, drawing its shards back together into something approaching its original wholeness. The Necrons would feel it first. Their tesseract labyrinths would tremble as the shards they contain responded to the call of their progenitor. The cryptechs who maintain the containment fields would watch in horror as their instruments registered power readings that exceeded anything in their experience. And then the shards would begin to break free, one by one, as tearing their way out of their prisons and surging across the galaxy toward the gravitational pull of the dragon's restored consciousness. How many shards of the Void Dragon exist across the galaxy? The lore does not give us an exact number, but the implication is that there are many, scattered across hundreds of tomb worlds and dynasty vaults and forgotten caches that have lain undiscovered for 60 million years. Each one is a fragment of the most technologically advanced being in the galaxy's history. Each one carries a piece of the knowledge and the capability that made the Void Dragon the master of the material realm. And each one, if reunited with the others, would contribute to the restoration of an entity whose full power has not been witnessed since before the rise of the Aeldari Empire. The prospect is almost too terrifying to contemplate. A fully restored void dragon would be a being of godlike power, capable of reshaping reality through its mastery of physical law. It could create weapons that make even the most advanced Imperial and Necron technologies look like children's toys. It could build armies of living metal that would make the current Necron forces seem primitive by comparison. It could erect pylon networks that would seal the Great Rift, cutting off the Chaos Gods from the material universe permanently, but in doing so, it would also cut off every psychic being in the galaxy from the warp, killing billions of astropaths, navigators and psychers in an instant, and leaving the Imperium blind, deaf, and unable to travel faster than light. This is the paradox at the heart of the Void Dragon's existence. It is both a potential savior and a potential destroyer. A being whose power could solve the galaxy's greatest problems, but whose nature makes it almost certain that it would create new problems far worse than the ones it solved. The dragon does not think in terms of human welfare or galactic stability. It thinks in terms of mastery and control, of energy consumption and technological dominance. It is not evil in the way that the Chaos Gods are evil, motivated by malice and the desire to corrupt. It is simply alien, utterly and fundamentally different from every other form of consciousness in the galaxy, operating according to principles and priorities that no human, no Eldari, no Necron, and no other being can fully comprehend. I should also mention the Void Dragon's connection to the mysterious substance known as Blackstone, or Noctilith, because this material plays a crucial role in understanding both the dragon's power and its imprisonment. Blackstone is one of the most enigmatic materials in the Warhammer 40,000 setting. It is a crystalline substance of unknown origin that possesses the unique ability to interact with both the Materium and the Immaterium. In its natural state, Blackstone is warp neutral, neither amplifying nor suppressing psychic energy, but when properly attuned, it can become either a conduit for warp energy or a barrier against it, depending on how it is aligned. The Blackstone fortresses, those massive constructs that have drifted through the galaxy for millions of years, are made of this material. During the War in Heaven, the Eldari used these fortresses as weapons against the Catan, channeling warp energy through their Blackstone matrices to create beams of destructive force that could wound even the Star Gods. This was one of the few effective weapons the Old One's alliance possessed against the Catan, and the battles between the Blackstone fortresses, and the Void Dragon in particular, were among the most devastating engagements of the entire war. But the Void Dragon, being the most technologically gifted of the Citan, eventually developed a counter to the Blackstone fortresses. It learned how to reverse the polarity of Blackstone, turning the material from a channel for warp energy into a barrier against it. This reversed Blackstone, aligned against the warp rather than with it, became the basis for the pylon networks that the Necrons erected across the galaxy, including the famous Cadian pylons that held the Eye of Terror in check for millennia. The relationship between the Void Dragon and Blackstone is therefore one of master and medium, of artist and canvas. The dragon understands Blackstone in a way that no other being in the galaxy does. It can attune the material to its own will, reshaping its crystalline structure to serve whatever purpose it requires. And since Blackstone is the one material in the galaxy that can interact with both the Materium and the Immaterium, the dragon's mastery over it gives it a unique ability to influence both realms of existence, even though its own power is rooted firmly in the material world. This is why the Citan shard of the Void Dragon model is depicted hovering above crackling columns of Blackstone energy. The shard is literally standing on the material that defines its power, channeling the unique properties of Noctilith to sustain its physical form and power its devastating attacks. The Blackstone responds to the shard's presence the way iron filings respond to a magnet, aligning itself along lines of force that radiate outward from the shard's necrodermis body. And this is also why the entity beneath Mars is imprisoned in a vault that is almost certainly lined with Blackstone. The Emperor, who understood the dragon's nature even if he did not understand every detail of its capabilities, would have known that Blackstone was the one material that could contain the dragon's power. He would have used Blackstone aligned against the dragon, attuned to suppress its influence rather than amplify it, apt to create a prison from which even the most powerful Satan could not escape. But Blackstone, like all things in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, degrades over time. The crystalline structure that gives the material its unique properties is not permanent. It can be disrupted by sufficient force, corrupted by prolonged exposure to warp energy, or simply worn down by the passage of millennia. And the dragon, imprisoned within its Blackstone vault, has been pressing against the walls of its cage for 10,000 years, probing for weaknesses, testing the limits of its confinement, searching for the crack that will allow it to break free. The destruction of the Cadian pylons during the 13th Black Crusade demonstrated that Blackstone containment systems, even those that have endured for millions of years, can be destroyed. Abaddon the Despoiler shattered the pylons by crashing a Blackstone fortress into the planet's surface, releasing the warp energy that had been held in check and creating the Great Rift that now splits the galaxy in two. If the same kind of catastrophic failure were to occur on Mars, if the Blackstone that contains the dragon were to crack or shatter or lose its alignment, the consequences would be incalculable. And in a galaxy where the Great Rift is pouring warp energy into the Imperium at an unprecedented rate, where the barriers between reality and the Imperium are thinner and more fragile than they have been since the fall of the Eldari, the risk of just such a failure grows with every passing day. So here we are, at the true end of our journey. We have explored 60 million years of history, traced the threads of influence that connect the Void Dragon to every major faction and storyline in the Warhammer 40,000 setting, and examined the philosophical, mythological, and narrative dimensions of one of the most complex and compelling entities in modern science fiction. The Void Dragon is not a simple creature. It is not a monster to be slain or a puzzle to be solved. It is a force of nature, a cosmic constant, a being whose existence raises questions about the nature of technology, the relationship between creator and creation, the price of immortality, and the meaning of consciousness itself. It is buried at the heart of the Imperium, sleeping beneath the most important planet in human civilization, its dreams shaping the beliefs and behaviors of billions of souls who will never know the truth about the God they worship. And one day, it will wake up. When that day comes, the galaxy will face a reckoning unlike anything it has experienced since the war in heaven. The balance of power between the Materium and the Immaterium will shift. The relationship between the Necrons and their former masters will be tested. The faith of the Adeptus Mechanicus will be shattered and rebuilt, or simply shattered and left in ruins. And every being in the galaxy, from the mightiest Chaos God to the lowliest hive worker, will feel the tremors of a god's awakening rippling through the fabric of reality. That is the promise of the Void Dragon. That is the threat that sleeps beneath Mars. And that is the story that Games Workshop has been building toward for over 20 years. One piece at a time, one hint at a time, one tantalizing fragment of lore at a time. The dragon sleeps, Mars listens, and the galaxy holds its breath. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the lore of Magladroth, the Void Dragon, the most powerful Citan in Warhammer 40,000. If you enjoyed this exploration and want to see more content like it, please hit that like button, subscribe to Q on 40,000, and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Leave a comment telling me what topic you want me to cover next, because your suggestions drive the direction of this channel, and some of the best videos I have made have come directly from viewer requests. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your passion for this incredible setting. I will see you in the next one. Take care, rest well, and remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is always more lore to discover. Good night.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.